All right, good morning, everyone. We might make a start. Is there an apology from James?
I don't have an apology. No. Marlene, do you have any apologies?
Oh, he has an apology. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our council meeting. This is the 8th meeting of 2019. I want to commence by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Butchulla people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. We have here with us today Jeff Jarvis, the chaplain at the Fraser Coast Anglican College, to lead us in prayer. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning. I hope you're as well behaved as our students were this morning. And it's a privilege to be here.
I can't promise
that. Thank you very much indeed. Lord God, as we gather today, we give thanks for the privilege of living in a region of such rich history and diverse beauty. Reminder that Dreamtime Wuku, whose wish to save this beautiful region from outsiders, led to the death of he and his family. We thank you for the care and nurturing love of this region by the Butchulla people, that today our community is rapidly approaching 100,000 inhabitants who come from all over our country. We thank you, Lord God, for the abundance of facilities and activities available in our region, such as the coming attractions at Westside, Teddy Bear's Picnic, Fun Palace, Enchanted Evening, the Fraser Coast Arts Link, Mamma Mia, the Torbanese School Fete, the second annual Ladybird lineup, and so much, much more for those who live in this region. We acknowledge the contribution of those from distant lands, faiths and cultures who serve us in various health facilities and practices, whose children grow in friendship together to be valuable and welcome members of this, their new home. May all involved in serving this our community of Fraser Coast region endeavour to discuss the matters at hand with courtesy, integrity and wisdom, so that this meeting be productive and beneficial to all. Amen. We say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. The next item is apologies and leave of absence. Do we have any apologies?
An apology from Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Hanson.
We don't. No. There's no. Did he? Can we check that?
We had a resolution.
Oh, okay.
So we do have an apology or leave of absence.
Yep.
So we.
A resolution of
The last council meeting we passed the leave. Okay, so there is leave of absence then for Councillor Hanson. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Understanding Order 8.2, I request respectfully that we move the deputation forward to this part of the meeting by the Heritage Society. They really don't need to sit and listen to all our disclosures of interest,
that's correct.
which is a complicated and time-consuming process. So.
So we're moving that item 7 be moved forward now. The deputation, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Everard, I'll put that. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. So we're very fortunate to have here with us today John, Harold and Lynn from the Harvey Bay Historical Village. Before we proceed, actually, given we didn't yet do the disclosures of interest, does anyone have a disclosure of interest on this item?
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
There's actually no resolution, is there? So there's no possible...
There's no decision.
No conflict.
I don't think.
Presentation.
Yeah, I don't think there could be. Yep. I just want to make sure, just because we're moving some.
There could be, Mr Mayor. So, Mr Mayor, is that I think that this group will be talking about a book that they produced. That book is sold in my business.
That's right. Yeah. I'll rule that there is. Do I need to make a ruling on that?
He hasn't declared
Yeah.
there's a perceived conflict, so he's just
Yeah.
made a statement.
I don't think
I would move that there be no conflicts in relation to this matter, as it's a deputation, and then that would be, I'd be seeking that from the chair.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Everard, put that motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Okay, so we got Harold, John and Lynn here, all from the Harvey Bay Historical Society Village and Museum, to speak about a really important project they've done on behalf of our community. Good morning, Harold.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors
ladies and gentlemen. It's really a privilege for me to stand here this morning representing the Hervey Bay Historical Museum. It's really prospering. It's going ahead in leaps and bounds. We've had so many people through recently. Just recently, one day, we had almost 100 people through. School children are coming by the hundreds, and we do our best to educate them on the things that we have down there and on the history of Hervey Bay. And so there's just two words I'd like to say to the council, and that is thank you, because they've been such a big help to us. You've really stuck by us, right from the mayor, right through to the staff at every level, and we're so privileged to have the council on side. So with regards to the book, John is the author, and I would like to hand over to John now because he has put a lot of work into that. I feel sure he'd like to say a few words, so thank you.
Thank you, Harold. Mayor George and your fellow councillors and ladies and gentlemen, other VIPs, the Hervey Bay Historical Village Museum has decided to present to each and every councillor here a copy of Moments in Time, our new book that was officially opened or launched in April of this year. Particular thanks go to George, a great friend of the museum, for his initial approach to me to write the book on a pictorial history of the area, and for the entire council for having the faith in our museum for them to partially fund the printing of the book. This has enabled this 200-page hard-covered book to be sold at a very, very competitive price of $30, which is indeed a bargain. I can report that the sale of this book has exceeded all of our expectations, as can be attested to by Councillor Rolfe over there. Through his Torquay Post Office, we appointed them as sole Torquay selling agents, and indeed the book has been nominated independently for the John Oxley Literary Library Award for 2019, but also for the Gamma, the Galleries and Museums Australia Award. And we only heard yesterday that on the Gamma Awards, we are in the short list of 2 finalists. So there's 2 finalists, we're one. I reckon that's about a 50-50 chance. That would be a great honour for not only us, but for the whole area. And that's in Cairns, actually, on the 19th of September. So today we're going to present to each of you, as we say, a book with a souvenir special edition certificate in the middle. You can keep that. Probably put the price down on eBay, but never mind. You'll see that Moments in Time has volume 1 on it, which was done deliberately because with the great success of this book, and I'd like to suggest that council consider that not too far down the track perhaps, the museum, which we've got the runs on the board as far as producing books, having produced the 150 book on the history of the Bay and the Pier Centenary, that we might look at doing a Moments in Time pictorial history of the Fraser Coast, which would include all of the Fraser Coast, all of the museums and other associations within the Fraser Coast. And I think that would be, if it's anything to go by as far as the success of this fellow, would be a great thing to have for our whole Fraser Coast Regional Council. So on behalf of all the members of the Hervey Bay Historical Village Museum, again, many thanks to each and every one of you fellows for having the faith in the museum to hand over the hard-earned ratepayers' money so that we could produce this. We also put some money into it, of course, but it's gone, as I said, beyond all our expectations. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to drop these around, and the first one I've got is for Darren Everard, and the second one I've got, we'll do 2 at a time. I've got Councillor Madigan. twice really. So Phil and James, if you maybe like to stand up, the Channel 7 here, they'll do a story about it. And we have
Sanderson.
for Daniel Sanderson. Oh, you got the wrong one. Okay. Where did I get mixed up there?
James is away.
Oh, James away. Okay, that, and also
Councillor.
Councillor. Right. Okay, so I think you got the right one now. Thank you, mate. And someone I see quite often. Thank you. And we have.
Councillor Lewis.
I didn't catch that one.
Councillor Lewis and Keith.
Councillor O'Keefe. And one of the older members of the Bay community, a good old friend of mine, David Lewis. Going.
Councillor Taylor.
I'm missing all of these asides.
Councillor Taylor.
Taylor and
Chapman.
Chapman. Well, without telling any tales out of the school, I can tell you that I've changed nappies on this fellow here. And also, Mr Mayor, we thought the council would love to give to the council itself to have in the foyer somewhere a copy of the Pier Centenary book. And these again have got a nice presentation thing inside, the history of Harvey Bay, the first 150 years, and also a copy of Moments in Time. And I think it'd be appropriate to present these to our CEO, Ken. Thank you so much, mate. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity that you gave us, and we feel it's been really successful and done something not only for us at the museum but for the whole area. Thank you.
The glass negatives, because I think what you've done there's a part of that is incredibly special, how, we try and stop as much going from landfill as possible, turn, waste to value to energy. Do you want to just really quickly, John, I know you can talk, but just talk about the glass negatives that were saved from
Come
the
along
dump.
to a talk at the library on next Wednesday if you want, or Miracle on Monday. But yeah, really, when I started to do the book, we've got a very, very big database at the museum, but when I started to do it, a dear old friend of mine that I taught with in Nanango many, many years ago rang me up and he said, would you be interested in some old glass negatives? I said, absolutely. So Bob Winnett brought those down to me. I set up the facilities to actually photographically change them from a glass negative into a digital image, and surprise, surprise, when they were done, they all turned out to be of this area. So we've got historic photos of Howard and Torbenlee, of the bush around here, of Tugum, of the island from 1890, long before film, 1890 to 2000 and about 1905, which are absolutely priceless. George has seen them. They're just, it was an absolutely godsend that we got those. The other thing in the book are the panograms, which is a complete list of panoramic photos from 1950, which are worth the price of the book, and also postcards from 1920. And most of the stuff in the book hasn't been printed before, so have a good read of it, and I'm sure you'll make good use of it. And don't forget, Christmas is coming up. We've got a few left down there. If you want a book, come and buy some. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, we'll return back to the order of the agenda. Item 3 is disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest? I can go through the forms if we like, first of all, or, yeah. Okay, that's right. Okay, so Councillor Darren Everard on the item 10.2.3. Do you want to speak to that one?
Yeah, can do. If I can find this thing, yeah. So on the CCTV matter 10.2.3, I am the president of the Harvey Bay Surf Lifesaving Club. So the Harvey Bay Surf Lifesaving Club is noted as a potential location for CCTV in the future in the report on pages 212 and 213. My interest is that I am the president, and we have offered our patrol tower as a possible site for CCTV in the future to assist with public safety. As president, I'm involved with the management of the club. Yeah, sorry. And yeah, I don't think there's a conflict of interest in this, and I plan on staying in the room for the vote.
I move that Councillor Everard does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting while agenda item 10.2.3 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Sanderson. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried.
I think if you just make sure no one else has the same conflict on that item.
Yeah, got it. No one else is going to declare conflict on that item? No? Good. Including you? No? Okay. All right. Councillor Taylor on item 10.3.9. Do you wish to, can you outline what your potential conflict is?
Find the email that was
Give it to them if you want.
Can I grab that form?
Just check before you go to vote and no one else has a
Mr.
conflict.
Chair, I wish to declare a perceived conflict of interest in relation to 10.3.9. It's in relation to a development application. The nature of interest is that I understand, and I don't know to what level his involvement is, but a person associated with this development, Michael Irwin, made a public one-sentence statement supporting me in the 2016 election as a private resident. He made a comment about my active involvement in the community, as did a number of other people. The way I intend to deal with the conflict is that I believe it's a perceived conflict, and I will be staying in the room subject to the vote of the council and voting on the matter.
All right, first of all, is there anyone else who's going to declare a possible conflict on this item? No?
Sorry, did I actually have this on?
I don't know.
For the record, do I need to, should I just state that it's in relation to the development application 10.3.9? The subject person who has an association with the development is Michael Irwin. He made a public statement endorsing me as a community leader in the community, and I believe that it's a perceived conflict. I'll be staying in the room, and I understand there's legislative framework about people supporting and handing out at elections, so I'm happy to remain in the room subject to councillors voting that way.
Can you just, one point, what's his relationship to the development application?
I don't know, I haven't actually had a discussion with him. I don't know, I understand he's associated with it. I don't know if he's, does anyone know? Is he, yeah. Is it, so I don't actually know that other than there. I understood that he was, like he was a consultant of some sort, but if one way or the other, he's certainly associated with it.
And the statement, was that in the form of an advertisement you placed? Or was it, like, can you elaborate how the statement came into the public domain?
I'd have to, it was actually him and his wife, and there was about 30 people that I got to write statements throughout the community that I put, I think, in a Facebook advert where it said, you know, Stuart's a good guy sort of thing. That's pretty much the extent of it.
Okay, I move that that Councillor Taylor has a perceived conflict of interest in relation to agenda item 10.3.9. Is there a seconder? Councillor Lewis. I'll move the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. I move that Councillor Taylor may participate, discuss and vote on agenda item 10.3.9, notwithstanding there is a perceived conflict of interest. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Truscott, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Are there any further disclosures of interest? Yes, Councillor Maddern.
Mr Mayor, it's in relation to item 10.3.5, parking in Maryborough. This is a perceived conflict of interest which I declared at the last general meeting, but the same thing holds. My family trust owns a property within a short distance of the resolution. There may be a perception that the tenants in the family trust building may gain an advantage from additional free parking in close proximity. As there is free parking directly opposite the trust building, I do not believe that there is any greater advantage to this building than to any other commercial property in the immediate vicinity, and as such, I propose staying in the room and voting on the matter subject to the will of the council.
Just for clarity, the property you're referring to, it's further away than the Carlton Hotel to this property, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on the other side of the Carlton Hotel, so it's further out. It's not quite, it's not in the CBD. as such.
Is there anyone else going to be declaring a conflict on this one? No. I move that Councillor Maddern does not have either a real or perceived conflict of interest in the matter and is accordingly free to participate in the meeting whilst agenda item 10.3.5 is discussed, including by voting on the matter. Seconded by Councillor Sanderson. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. Councillor Chapman, do you want to speak about item, which is it? This one doesn't say.
Yeah, item 10.2.10.
Microphone.
Yeah.
And that's the rural fire levy. So it's the other one to this.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, that's your rural fire levy.
No, that's the other one.
I've got a perceived conflict of interest. That I am a volunteer fireman at the Nikenbar Fire Station, and I do not have any role of the finances of the organisation. And I'm saying that I've got a perceived conflict here as I'm a volunteer, and I will be staying in the room on the decision of the vote of the councillors.
I move that Councillor Chapman has a, is anyone else going to be, I move that Councillor Chapman has a perceived conflict of interest in relation to item 10.2.10. And Councillor Secretary Everard, I put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. I move that Councillor Chapman may participate, discuss and vote on agenda item 10.2.2, notwithstanding there is a perceived conflict of interest. Second, Councillor Everard, put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried.
Okay. Mr Mayor, I've also got a real conflict of interest for item in confidential 15.3, and it's a matter of land. I am on the board of a hospice committee, and I will be leaving the room and not participating in any way in this negotiations.
Yeah. Is there a need for resolution then? Yeah. Yeah. So there's no resolution needed? Yep. Okay. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Any further? Yeah, Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. My declaration relates to item 10.3.10, which is the recommendations for Regional Arts Development Fund Round 2. The nature of my interest is that in respect of one of the projects recommended for funding, my wife Susan Ann Lewis is the volunteer project coordinator. It's strictly a volunteer role. She's not getting paid, but in any event, I'll deal with it by leaving the meeting while that matter is discussed and voted on. Just for the sake of completeness, I will also just mention, because the report doesn't refer to it, I'm on the assessment committee for Regional Arts Development Fund, the advisory committee. When that item was discussed, I left the room in that committee meeting, so I didn't take part in that discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Light.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, a perceived conflict of interest I wish to declare on 10.3.1, which refers to the Burrum Community Centre RV sites proposed to amend length of stay. Wish to declare a perceived conflict of interest as my niece and her husband have recently purchased the supermarket, now branded IGA. I feel that I can stay in the room.
So it's the IGA, it's about 500 metres, would you say, away from the site? Hmm? That's the character, I think it's 10. No, it's not. 10, what number?
10.3.2. My apologies.
Yeah.
Mr Mayor,
That's a different item.
you feel that I need to leave the room, I'll leave the room.
Sorry? Oh, no, he's leaving the room. Councillor Lewis says no. Well, that's what I understand. If we did the same with Councillor Chapman, that if they say they're leaving the room, there's no motion?
Declare conflict, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
I move that Councillor Light has a perceived conflict of interest in relation to agenda item 10.3.2. Is there a seconder? Councillor Taylor. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. I move that Councillor Light must leave the room and stay away whilst agenda item 10.3.2 is voted on due to a perceived conflict of interest. If there's a seconder. Councillor O'Keefe, is there any discussion? Councillor Lewis?
Yes, could I just ask a question? I'm not as familiar with this as perhaps others. Is there an alternative accommodation site? I mean, this relates to allowing people to stay effectively an extra night. Is there an alternative accommodation site where they could stay if they weren't able to stay 2 nights in this particular spot?
He's trying to get to the bottom of it.
And the reason for it is that, I mean, if 10 people stay in town, it doesn't really matter where they stay. If this is not increasing the number of people, then whether they stay at an RV site or a caravan park, they've still got the same opportunity to shop with the relative. It may be different if this is the only site.
There's movement. Secondly, you have to deal with the business. He's talking to the matter of the motion, and he's talking to the subject matter, not in relation to the conflict.
Yeah, that's right, because we're about to go to a vote and he's trying to inform himself. I think other people can also respond, but there is no other accommodation in Howard. I mean, the nearest would be across, on the other side of the Burn River. Councillor Taylor?
I will be voting against the resolution simply because I believe it's more aligned to a strategy of council, particularly around RV sites, which
Here we are. They want to know how they're going to vote.
and I believe that that Councillor Light can demonstrate a fair and reasonable approach to this, even considering his perceived conflict. So I would be voting against it.
Yep. Councillor Truscott?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would follow Councillor Taylor there. I would be voting against Councillor Light having to leave. I don't think there's enough of a conflict that it's his niece, wasn't it? And there's no... yeah, no, not a child, and yeah, not a direct connection, and that you're not receiving anything out of this.
Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour? 3, 4. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's lost. I move that Councillor Light may participate, discuss and vote on agenda item 10.3.2, notwithstanding there is a perceived conflict of interest. Is there a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Taylor, put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. Are there any further disclosures of interest? Remember, if one springs to your mind later, don't worry about bringing it up late. Yep.
Mr Mayor, I think it's important to identify that at a previous meeting, I identified that item 10.3.7, as it related to home-based businesses. My wife has a home-based business, but on reading the report, it's so far detached from what she does that I don't believe it even it doesn't even reach the threshold of a perceived conflict, because it relates to industrial matters rather than photography, which my wife is a photographer.
Yep. Okay, if there's no further disclosures of interest, Councillor Sanderson?
Through the chair, similar to Councillor Tyler, that's exactly what I raised last meeting as well.
Yeah.
And agree with the comment.
Okay, so you're not raising one? Okay. Yeah. Agenda item 4, mayoral minutes. There are none. Agenda item 5.1, the ordinary meeting minutes from July, which have been distributed. That's on page 5. Is there a mover that may be accepted? Moved by Councillor Madden, seconded by Councillor Light. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is a report on public participation by the CEO.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. We had 4 people participate in public participation today. The first person was Mr Craig Barrett. He requested that the Pyalba car park should be removed from the Esplanade because of inconsistencies with the Esplanade Master Plan and Council's parking strategies. The second person at public participation was Ms Jennifer Kircher. She expressed a safety concern about trees in close proximity to her residence in Rochester Court and requested that they be trimmed and that undergrowth be more effectively managed by Council. She also brought the Council's attention to requested information in relation to the provision of free mulch. The third participant was Mr Lloyd Madden. Lloyd outlined the importance and success of the recent rider event at the Maryborough Showgrounds and expressed his appreciation and that of the committee for the support provided by Council that enabled the rider program to be so successful. The final participant was Mr Graham Woad. He expressed his appreciation in relation to 4 matters previously raised with Council and raised concerns in relation to sewer blockages, toilet blockages at the New Wharf toilet, cleaning of parklands, street lighting, block drains and preservation of cast iron covers. And he also provided an update on flooding issues. That's the report, Mr Mayor.
Just a question to the CEO. In relation to the first participant, relating to the car park at Pyalba, he made a statement in relation to the car park costing $1 million and that it was the cost to construct the skate park was 20% of effectively what it costs to build the car park. It may be a question directed to one of your staff, but I understand that that's probably more in line. Initially, the budget was about $550,000 with some another $100,000 worth of spending. And so if I could just get that figure clarified. The second part, I just wanted to put it on record. It referred to the car park strategy not referring to the principles not being endorsed in the car park strategy, and I just wanted to point out, number 1, is of the objectives to ensure reasonable parking supply to support prosperous and vibrant commercial and high tourist activity centres. But if I could just... Thank you, Councillor. Just in relation to the first item, the statement that was made in relation to the cost of the car park and the relative costs of the skate park in comparison to the car park were incorrect, and I'll just get the Acting Director of Development Community to confirm those costs.
Through the Chair, the cost of the car park, the contract value was $530,000. There was variations of $120,000 based on site requirements.
In relation to the second comment regarding parking strategies, I believe that your statement is correct, that the location of the car park is consistent with the car parking strategy that you mentioned.
And for the record, that's page 2 under the heading of the objectives of the parking strategy R2, and it's point number 1. So it was the car parking strategy, and it was page 2. And when it talks about the heading is the objectives of the parking strategy R2, and point 1 is to ensure reasonable parking supply to support prosperous and vibrant commercial and high tourist activity centres, which, in my view, the Pyalba precinct is certainly a high tourist activity centre.
Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is receipt of petitions. Are there any petitions to be tabled? Councillor Everard?
Yeah, I'll go on if there's no one else. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a petition from the Riverheads Progress Association. And the nature of the petition is we, the undersigned, request that the Fraser Coast Regional Council consider a reduction of the speed limit on Ariadne Street, Riverheads. There are concerns in the community for the safety of residents and road users caused by speeding motorists entering the community. We are seeking reduction from 60 kilometres an hour to 50 kilometres an hour to assist with slowing down the traffic in the Riverheads Township area. And there's 52 signatures on this petition.
So under the standing orders, you can only move that it be received and referred to a committee or officer for consideration and report to council, or not be received because it is deemed invalid. Are you moving perhaps that it be received and referred to the round table or the TAC?
To the TAC.
Yeah. So the motion is that the petition be received and referred to the Traffic Advisory Committee.
Yep.
You seconding that, Councillor Chapman? Yep. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Are there any other petitions? No. The next item is item 9.1, the Wide Bay Water and Waste Services Advisory Committee meeting minutes of August 2019 on page 28.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, which is that they be noted.
Yep, and Councillor Everard seconding. Is there any discussion, speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Next item on page 33 is item 9.2, the Fraser Coast Regional Council Audit Committee meeting minutes. Is there a mover that they be received and noted? Councillor Truscott, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 9.3 is the Environmental Advisory Group meeting minutes of 8th of May on page 39. There's quite a substantial recommendation. Is Councillor Lewis, are you going to speak to this? Yeah. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Light? Yeah. Councillor Lewis?
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I should just draw attention. I don't think it needs any amendment, but there are a couple of errors in the minutes, which there's actually an error in the heading of the item because it relates to the minutes of a meeting on 25 July, not 8 May 2019.
Well, that's in the recommendation as well, the date, the first, number 1.1.
Yes, you're right. That should refer to, and if I may, with the seconder's permission, adopt that amendment so that it refers to the minutes of 25 July 2019 in the minutes themselves. And as I say, I don't know that this really needs an amendment because we're simply, I think, receiving the minutes rather than approving them. On page 42 in the middle it says GVL, which is Jerry Vanderlee, discuss the Tree Front Services Action Plan. I think that should be the Threatened Species Action Plan. I'm not aware that we've got a Tree Front Services Action Plan yet, although it may be a good idea. And then in item 4.3 on page 43 there's a reference to Jennifer Campbell, which I think should be to Janet Campbell. Yeah. I simply note these rather than...
Threatened species becomes tree front services under...
It's easy enough done.
No, I think it's autocorrect. Threatened
it's just auto-corrected.
Threatened species to tree front services. I just think there was...
Yeah, it's probably where it came from. That aside, I just do want to note the varying recommendations which have been made in there. The Conservation Areas Concession Policy has a problem in that it's limited to nature reserves or nature refuges approved by the state government, and they've stopped doing that. There are only 2 in the whole of the Fraser Coast region, and at the current moment, no one else will ever be eligible. So the proposal is that the council should consider looking at broadening that concession policy, otherwise it in effect becomes a dead letter. And that's covered in those recommendations. And you'll note, and I don't intend to speak on it because we have worked on it before, but you'll note that advisory group also recommends the reinstatement of an environmental levy to support the various matters referred to on page 40. Adopting this doesn't obviously mean an environmental levy will be instated, but one would hope that we can consider this at an appropriate time. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers? No, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.1.1, open resolutions register on page 47. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Mattern. Imagine there'll be a few questions. Yeah, Councillor Truscott.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. One that I just wanted to follow up on page 67 was about the recruitment of animal management officers. I understand we've got some current vacancies, but also some new positions to go out, and just looking for an update on that.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. I can't respond to that with any level of accuracy and certainty. I'm not sure if the acting director can. I'm waiting for him to give me a nod that he can or can't. So we'll have to take that on notice, unfortunately.
Yep. Unless he can.
I am aware, through you, Mr Mayor, that the positions have been advertised recently, and that's all the information that I have at hand.
Yep. Yeah, Councillor. Okay, just need to note, so when you leave the room, understand what?
You just need advice.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Any further questions? If not, I'll move the motion, moved by Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Mattern. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously, 9-0. The next item is item 10.2.1, interim local law number 1 on page 84. Councillor Everard's moving this. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mattern? Yep. Councillor Taylor?
I just wanted to clarify, the attachment 1 obviously is the interim local law, and that won't be changed, and what will be amended is the actual attachment 2, which is the Fraser Coast Regional Council subordinate local law. Is that?
Just give me a moment, Mr Mayor, just to catch up.
Yep.
I'm just mindful that the actual schedule which we're referring to is in the subordinate local law, but is not in the actual. I guess my question relates is, does point 1 need to refer to the actual subordinate local law and not the local law, or does it cover both? Because the actual.
Thanks for your question, Councillor. I think for the sake of completeness, I think it would be appropriate that the council resolve in terms of the recommendation, that if a councillor was willing to do this, I'm just getting to the recommendation, adopt the draft interim local law number 1 and the subordinate local law, just for completeness, because I'm pretty sure it's the subordinate local law that was the issue.
I just want to clarify, when you actually read attachment 1, there is absolutely no change to that. And as you can see, it hasn't even got draft written on it, but the change is definitely in page 94 onwards. Yeah, from page 94, which is referred to as the Fraser Coast Regional Council subordinate local law number 1, administration 2011.
So the director has just taken advice from our manager of internal audit and governance, so I'll pass to him.
Thank you, Mr CEO. Through you, Mr Mayor, our manager of governance has just advised that the legal advice is to adopt the interim local law 1, which does give effect to some changes in the subordinate local law. When the new local law is adopted, there will be further amendments that will come into effect at that point in time. So the recommendations in the report, in accordance with the legal advice we have received, are correct. And if you require a further detailed explanation, I would defer to our Manager of Governance to explain it in a bit more detail.
Well, just for completeness, because it appears as though we're amending a local law rather than the subordinate local law without reference to it. So if I could just get clarity on that to ensure that we don't have to come back and revisit it.
My understanding of the advice was that we would not be adopting changes to the subordinate local law, that we would adopt the interim local law. If I can just look for a correction.
I know it's an interim one, but the changes are to the subordinate local law, like to the subordinate. There's two limits to it, isn't there? There's a local law, and then there's the subordinate. And my question is, does the only amendments are to the subordinate local law?
That's correct.
So would it be incorrect to avoid all doubt and add into the resolution reference to and the Fraser Coast Regional interim local subordinate local law?
Yeah, because it's not mentioned in the resolution.
Sorry, I didn't say that right.
I can't see how it would hurt to cover the fields. I mean, that can't possibly be detrimental if somehow we thought that it was covered anyway.
Or you could just put and associated subordinate law. Yeah.
We're adopting the interim local law,
which
is
then
a standalone document that affects change to the subordinate local law. Yes, so it is a little bit confusing, but it's actually a standalone document, and it's a mechanism to affect change to the subordinate local law.
Basically, if we, through the chair, so basically if we pass the interim law, it automatically, as a consequence of that, changes
That's right.
the subordinate.
That's right. And within the interim local law, it does say in part 3 that the interim local law amends the subordinate local law. Yes.
So can you clarify where the amendment has been made in relation to the interim local law? Like we've had it with, didn't we adopt a local law number 1? And now this is effectively superseding that through an interim measure. And there should be some change in the local law that triggers the change in the subordinate law.
So local law number 1 itself has not changed at this point in time. Council is adopting, so the interim local law is like a totally new document itself. So you've got your local law number 1 here, and then your subordinate local law, and then we've got an interim local law, which is affecting change to your subordinate.
Yeah.
But local law number 1 is still in existence, it's still operating, and it's still fine. It's just the interim to affect change to the subordinate.
Can we just say that? I mean, I mean, you can see that in clause 3 of it, that it, it amends it. But can't that go in the, I just think that it's much better practice for somebody to see a resolution and know what it's doing.
Yeah, and I think the matters that have been raised by council seem to be common sense and logical. The process for amending local laws is set by regulation and law, and sometimes that isn't common sense and logical. Whilst I would prefer, I'd be more comfortable with the amendment that's been proposed to include subordinate local law. I'm conscious that this is a very prescriptive process, and if we have legal advice from an expert in the field of establishing local laws, notwithstanding our personal feeling and the comfort that we would get from amending the resolution, I think that probably we should be passing resolution in accordance with the legal advice. I'd hate for us to put an amendment in that we think makes sense and is logical, advice that we've complicated the process or that the decision of council has no effect.
So this would be an amendment like having clause 5 notes that this amends the subordinate law number 1. So adding another clause, so not mucking around with the existing 4.
So that's what's going to be my suggestion, Mr Mayor. Perhaps we add another recommendation. The council notes the adoption of interim local law number 1 gives effect to the changes of the subordinate local law as contained in attachment 2.
And if we wanted to be really
Yeah, and-
precious about it, that could be a whole separate resolution. I mean, it's probably better it's clause number 5, but if we wanted to have 2 resolutions.
I think that the suggestion made by the director is a good suggestion, and it would be appropriate to include it as point 5 in the existing resolutions. And I think it would address the issues and concerns that we have about the changes to the subordinate local law not being identified or recorded in the council's minutes.
Good with that?
Yeah.
Say that again, Pete.
It was my idea. I thought it was.
We've got another one to note.
So the council notes that the adoption of the interim local law number 1, will give rise to changes in.
You're going to ask me to say it again?
Yeah.
We'll give effect.
Give effect.
We'll give effect to the changes in subordinate local law number 1, administration, as contained in attachment 2 to this report.
All right, are there any speakers to this? And that's acceptable to the mover and seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.2, Council Policy CCTV. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Attachment 2, and then we'll put the description of attachment 2.
Okay, the next, we're all right? Yep. So we're on page 176, item 10.2.2. The recommendations on that page note the CCTV strategy report and adopting the policy. Is there a mover for that? Moved Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Truscott. Did you wish to speak to this?
Just that I move that the defence no longer be heard. No, sorry, Dave. I'm sure you've got something you want to say, so. I think you've got some questions.
Yes, yeah. Councillor Lewis?
Look, I do propose to move an amendment as per the amendment I circulated. But just a couple of questions first, and it relates to cost. I mean, I'm acutely aware of the fact that a lot of this is really state government responsibility, that we're delving into areas where the primary role in terms of law enforcement and so on is a state government matter, notwithstanding that I appreciate the CCTV apparatus does, is supported by council documents as well. But my first question really is to ascertain whether, given the very significant cost, whether we are getting any contribution from the state government towards this infrastructure and the ongoing operational costs. I note, for instance, at page 179, that of the 36 outstanding requests for new CCTV, 22 were from the Queensland Police. And I'll perhaps say a bit more about that in relation to the next item, but that's a pretty significant number when what in effect we're doing is supporting a state government department. So my first question really is there any, historically have we got contributions from the state government? And I'll mention my second question because they can really be dealt with together, I think. I'm assuming that, I gather from the tenor of the report, that this policy will set up a framework for dealing with it, but commitments on a year-to-year basis would have to be dealt with through the in a position to allocate would be dealt with at budget time. They're essentially the questions
I can take that question. Mr. Smith, thank you for the question, Councillor. In relation to the first point, the state government has strongly contributed in the past to the capital costs of installing CCTVs. I don't have the figures at hand, and I doubt that the director has those figures at hand, but they've been a major contributor and supporter of the installation of CCTV for the purposes of public safety. In relation to the second point, which was the budget, yes, so in relation to the budget, sorry. So this process, so the adopting this policy and the assessment framework now gives the council an opportunity to consider, to do a detailed consideration of the relative merits of the applications. It would be subject to budget provisions, and I think as a result of, if the recommendations that are put forward today in relation to CCTV are adopted, there will be some funds that remain unspent, and the allocation of those funds can be considered with further applications that have been received during the year, perhaps 6-month budget review, or at any other time. But the overall financial restriction on CCTV expenditure will be the budget or amended budget.
Follow-up question, if I may, and that is that it'll be useful, to know how much we're actually getting from the state government. But I'm assuming that we could liaise with the state government on these issues prior to developing a budget, in the hope that we would get some, subsidy, perhaps even better than on a one-to-one basis towards the cost of providing support to the state government.
That's possible, yes.
Mr Mayor, I actually will speak for this motion. I feel that it'll be good to adopt this motion, and what I look at is why I'm speaking for it is it's all about making our city a smarter, safer environment to live, and I think that CCTV is really been improving in different areas. I know it costs money, but it costs money it would cost a lot more money if we didn't have a safe city. So I feel that this money that we're putting into our CCTV is deterring from some of these people doing the wrong thing out there, because they know that there's an eye watching them, and I really feel that this has been proven in other cities across the Queensland, that from putting CCTV in and using smart technology, there's ways of preventing crime, and I will be voting for this in a strong way.
Mr Mayor, I wish to move an amendment, if I may. And the substance of the amendment, which I've circulated, but for the benefit of... Yeah, sure.
Would you be open to having all questions being asked before you move that motion? If anyone else has got other questions, just to assist with because I may have questions that might also lead to an amendment as well.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, mine are relatively machinery amendments, but nonetheless, yes, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. So just in relation to, and I don't know who I'm directing this to, but perhaps to the CEO through the chair.
Technically to the chair.
Yes.
In theory, maybe not.
Yes. It relates to, obviously there's a process to follow for people or for the assessment of requests for CCTV, and it refers to triggers. Can I get a comment in relation to a trigger that, how is it triggered if a new council asset or something like the Pyalba Youth Precinct is built? What trigger is there to bring on CCTV in that space rather than going to a biannual report?
Thanks, great question, Councillor. And this is a question that relates also to our smart cities strategy. So I've made it very clear to directors that in any future capital works projects that we need to consider as part of our project scope, how we implement the council's smart cities strategy, which includes the provision of CCTV and other smart technology. So it will be considered as part of the project scope and part of the project brief for those projects, and wouldn't be necessarily subject to this particular assessment process, although that process would be followed through to determine whether that CCTV should be included in the scope. Does that make
Yeah, so if I read on page 186 where it talks about triggers, is that something that needs to be captured in here, or is it something that overarches it in a different section of infrastructure development, or?
I don't think there's a need to include it in this particular policy or assessment framework. The process for it can be captured as a part of our project management framework, particularly when we start scoping out projects that we consider the smart city strategy and the need to install CCTV. And if CCTV was warranted, the scope, particularly for Category A projects, the scope comes back to council for consideration. Opportunity to, if the council agrees or disagrees with CCTV, there's opportunity there to have the comment, but it'll be captured as part of the overall budget costs or project costs rather than part of the CCTV budget.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Mayor and Mr. CEO, I'd be comfortable to reflect an amendment to the assessment framework just to recognise that CCTV funding may be sourced through individual project budgets where council are adopting the projects. If we just make that reference there, it makes that explicit, that addresses Councillor Taylor's point, and it doesn't change the process and it doesn't change your response.
And that can be done at an officer level as a minor change rather than have to change a resolution here. Yep. So through the chair, when reading the document, it did. I noted that it is a request for CCTV and a policy to identify where they should be installed. And maybe I've sort of missed it, but what is to me the first and most important investment that we need in relation to CCTV is connectivity of our existing network, and I would rather see before another camera is installed that the investment is to make it more functionable for law enforcement or security to access, so I'm wondering how that is reflected or is likely to be reflected in any policy.
The continued development of our CCTV network is part of the planning activity that we do. So the assessment of each individual request considers its connectability to the existing system, but we already have in place and plans to expand our fibre network and various other connections to ensure the greater connectivity and accessibility of the CCTV network. One of the costs to council of operating the network is the provision of information to our Queensland Police Service on request, but we're looking to establish more of our infrastructure such that the Queensland Police will have greater access directly from their various offices to monitor or respond to calls from that. It's quite likely that council will still be required to provide evidentiary information from our network, but part of the scope of work, just to summarise, is to expand and develop the functionality where it's economical to do so of our CCTV network.
And I'm wondering where that's captured in the...
It's not captured explicitly in the policy, I guess, say for the responsibility for us to continue to develop and monitor the framework. As we upgrade our technology and replace cameras, we look to upgrade to a later or more proficient technology, and where possible we will...
Is there a sentence that can be put into 185, page 185 under objective that would, just that one sentence you talked about, connectivity or functionality of the existing network, would having a motherhood statement in there help ensure that that's still front of mind in relation to our commitment to CCTV?
We could certainly come up, include something in there around that.
And that's something you could do later on that doesn't need an amendment to this resolution?
We could. I'd be comfortable to note these 2 points in council's resolution, and officers can work on the drafting independently.
So do I need to write something or just note? Right.
Sorry, it'd have to be added to the resolution that the
Alright,
council
well,
note that the following matters will be considered and addressed as part of the assessment framework.
All right, well, I'll hand over to, no, I'll let me, if I could write something while the amendment is being put forward by,
Yes, and just in relation to the upgrading of our network, we're spending $304,000 this year on CCTV upgrades and fixes, replacing old cameras with new cameras that can actually have better clarity, and looking at improving network connectivity. So it is part and parcel of what we do as part of our ongoing operation, maintenance and refurbishment of our CCTV network.
Yes, thank you. The amendment, which I've, as I say, I've circulated, relates to 3 items, and they're really all just machinery items. The way I've proposed it is that under the recommendation 2, at the end of that, we just simply add, subject to amending, 1, the policy to add after agencies in the third dot point in item 2.5, the words, or any party who is involved in relevant court proceedings. So that's in the policy on page 181. The second item, the assessment framework, so that is subject to amending to the assessment framework by adding to item 4.0 a subparagraph H, which reads, consider privacy factors. And the third one, by amending the assessment framework to include the detail of the assessment scoring. So that's the amendments I was proposing.
Is there a seconder for that? I'm happy to second it.
Does the mover accept the
court proceedings, so that you're thinking about personal injuries,
If I may just explain, look, it's really any relevant court proceedings, and I suppose what the purpose of this is that dot point prohibits releasing the information to anyone other than law enforcement agencies, other than under legal compulsion. The point of this, and that's a prohibition. The point of this is permissive rather than mandatory. It's simply saying that council's not prohibited. If, for instance, there was a court proceeding on, be it civil or criminal, and somebody was named in it, and that person's lawyer wrote and said, "Could I have a look at the CCTV on this because it's relevant to the court case?" The council could consider whether that was appropriate, and if it was appropriate, then that would save the bother and the expense of that party going to court to get an order to compel the disclosure. It's just a machinery thing. It doesn't compel the council to make it available, but it would simply allow the council to make a decision on a case-by-case basis as to whether that was appropriate. And of course, that can have some significant savings in costs. I mean, if you were acting for a defendant, and the police have got him with a lovely picture on camera, if his lawyer sees that, he'll recommend he pleads guilty, and that'll save everyone a lot of bother and the community a lot of cost. It just gives the opportunity to council to make that decision in an appropriate case.
I'll be seeking to table this so that we can work.
Remove that line table.
Yeah.
Put the motion, all in favour? Any opposed? That's carried.
Can I seek this matter be tabled as, lie on the table. Ten point 2.5, the Royal Flying Doctor Service landing fees. That's moved by Councillor Everard. Is there a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe. And that's page 286.
Mr Mayor, I have an amendment to that as well. Which is very simple. You'll see in the second line it says, which includes the waiving of landing fees. It seems to me that on that recommendation, that's suggesting that the waiving of landing fees is a mandatory part of that sponsorship agreement. And as I understand it, that wasn't what the intention was. I understand the intention was that that will be a possibility among others as we negotiate a sponsorship agreement. So my proposed amendment was, instead of which includes, it should read which may include the waiving of...
Are you happy with that?
What were you going to say? Sorry, Mr. Senior. I was waiting for you to comment. So,
Through the chair, thanks, councillor. My expectation is that a component of the sponsorship will include waiving of landing fees, whether that be full or in part, but it'd be a necessary element of sponsorship, because really that's the only thing we've got to add to the sponsorship is the waiving of fees, either full or in part. And I read that as being not mandatory that they will be waived in full. It could be waiving of fees by 10%, 20%, 50%, subject to negotiation. So, but I don't have a problem with your proposed wording, because I think it just provides clarity.
Yeah, Councillor O'Keefe, you're happy with that change? Yep. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion, all in favour. Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.6, the delegations register update on page 289.
Mr Mayor,
Councillor Madden.
I'm happy to move this, but I did have a couple questions, which council officers have provided information on, and I'm just, if you'll bear with me, because it's a very long document.
While you're doing that, I'll see if there's a seconder. Is there a seconder? Councillor Everard? Yep.
So in speaking to this, on page 383 of our agenda, the item says, power to levy rates or charges or adjust the rates or charges levied in a financial year, even though the resolution for making the rates or charges was made for a previous financial year. I have received a quite extensive briefing on this, and there's a lot of legalese in it. I'm not proposing to read it all out, but I am proposing to pull out the key paragraph which responds to that, to this particular matter. And it says, this section ensures that councils do not lose revenue based merely on such timing issues. A rate notice or amended rate notice can be issued whenever its issue is authorised by some other provision of the Act, regardless of the fact that the rates concerned were made for a previous financial year. So I think that effectively answers that question that, you know, how come we're changing, basically changing the rules, it sounded like to me. And the other one is on page 384. The CEO has the power for interest on overdue rates or charges to decide the rate of interest payable. the day from which interest is payable on overdue rates and charges, and the manner of the calculation of the interest. We moved a resolution in the budget that adopted the interest rate.
So what page is that one on?
384, the next page. The advice from the LGAQ on this matter is, as provided, says the delegation of the power is one that that the author from the LGAQ says that I wouldn't expect a CEO to exercise unless there were very unusual circumstances. The decision about interest rate is limited to the maximum provided under LGR's subsection 133 from time to time, and the maximum is resolved by the government once per year at the budget meeting, with typical effective date of July 1 each year, which is the point that I was making. In fact, section 133 4B requires for a decision under subsection 3B be made by resolution at the local government's budget meeting for the financial year that includes the day to which the decision relates. So basically reading from that, I'm not quite sure why it's there, but apparently there must have somewhere down the track been a circumstance where this was necessary. But it's very unusual and unlikely to be used.
And it'll be a brave CEO who used that.
When
we have a budget policy of setting the interest rate lower than the maximum.
Yeah, so I would believe so. I thank the officers for their advice.
It's often the same thing. Okay, so did we have you seconded it, didn't you? Yeah.
I'm good.
Are there any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.7, councillor meeting attendance for September 2019. That's on page 645. Moved Councillor Everard, seconded Councillor Truscott.
We just got the amendment taken out 2nd September.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, I'll just make a comment.
Yep.
Sorry, you amending it, there'd be,
The 2nd of September, is that been amended out of it?
well, we can't amend a report, you need to.
Yeah, your resolution.
Yeah, they were going to adjust it. They were going to recommend.
Yeah, it's actually it's in clause 1. So he's moving something slightly different to the recommendation.
Yeah,
Less that line.
less that line of.
I thought we were going to start putting the actual council meeting in as well. So
And the bottom 2.
oh no, okay, yeah.
So Mr Mayor, just to be clear, that Councillor Everard's moving the officer's recommendation with the 2nd of September meeting date being deleted.
Deleted, yes.
Yep.
Round tables.
Yeah. So who is? Yeah, Councillor Light.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just, I will be on leave those 2 weeks. I won't be away when there's a normal council meeting. There is a form to the CEO regarding that, and the only meeting I'll miss will be a council briefing meeting on the 9th of September.
Yeah. Okay, excellent.
Mr Mayor, on that basis, I have also applied for leave and will be absent. I won't be absent for our councillor meeting, but I will be for the other.
Okay, let's move Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Truscott. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.2.8 on page 647, the organisational performance report for July. So the recommendation on page 647 is our mover for that. Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Madden. Are there any questions or speakers on this? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.9 on page 662 is the telecommunication lease on Edward Street. You're moving that, are you? Sure. Was it a different one? Oh, no.
Well, happy to move that one.
Okay. Yeah. Is there a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Madden. I thought you wanted to move. Oh, it's on that. Yeah. Okay. That's page 662. Are there any questions?
No.
No. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Okay, sorry. Item 10.2.10, the rural fire levy on page 665.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that and also flag an amendment, please, as well.
Yep. Well, do you want to wait till you hear what the amendment is? Oh, sorry, wait. No, sorry, it was a subsequent motion, wasn't it?
Foreshadow motion, however, no, there will be, there is an amendment to the motion, the officer's recommendation, which is on page 665. I forwarded that to my colleagues yesterday, and also our secretaries over there have that. After that, if that motion is successful, then I foreshadow an additional motion with your allowance, Mr Mayor.
And Councillor Truscott, so you're moving okay, you're seconding, sorry, yep.
And that motion now, I believe, is on that screen as we speak. Is that correct, Marlene? The addition to the motion, I should say.
Yep. All right. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes. Thank you, Mr Mayor. For some time now, I have questioned the rural fire levy fairness with our volunteers. I don't think this is anyone could take this as a retreat away from our support to the rural fire volunteers at all. However, because of the new fire stations that have and could potentially be activated in the full-time or part-time urban fire service, this can severely impact on the quantum of the levy. So I am very passionate about to take this further to a workshop that has all the key stakeholders on it, with councillors, finance staff, and particularly the Queensland Fire Service, both rural and fire rescue. I believe that we can come up with a formula that can maintain this level of support, and particularly the fairness. And this council in this term has certainly displayed, I believe, very good management in terms of the fairness of rates with our rates committee, and I think this is just another step forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think only just to simply state, I think the Rural Fire Service are doing a tremendous job throughout our region, and I thank Councillor Light for bringing this issue to our awareness and to try and improve the situation.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to just say firsthand that I've actually seen the role of what the auxiliary fire brigade, the rural fire brigades do for our region, and for the little bit that that residents actually pay for a levy. I look at this as being a little bit of an insurance policy, because to have if there's a major fire within an area, this whole region can turn out to that fire with a control centre. I've seen houses under risk that the fire brigade have actually stopped and saved people's properties. Also saved rural land, which is grass and feed is so valuable these days for property owners in the dry weather. And I feel that this is a great motion, and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Yes, so Mr Mayor, yes, the foreshadow motion would be, very simply, after this one was successful, would be up to 3 nominees are called for councillors' position on the working group for the rural fire levy workshops.
Wouldn't that just be point 3 because if it fails, it fails?
Yeah, well, Councillor Taylor, I'm not going to disagree with you, but that was the advice I was received by the CEO.
Either way would work, councillor. So if you wanted to add it, include it in your motion to.
I'm quite happy to add it into the motion if that's.
So you want to call for nominations of up to 3 councillors for membership on the working group.
So we'll need the seconder's permission.
So are you going to call for them? Are you going to call for them today?
Oh, that was my intention. Yes.
Notice that as a second, I'd be happy to accept that.
Then we would need. I would put it as a motion that 3 councillors be called on, but you don't do that as part of a nomination process here. It's more of a procedural matter that occurs afterwards, where we can have discussion, maybe at a briefing. But as long as you say you want 3, then you don't actually have to have nominations now.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy with that.
3 councillors.
Yeah. The only thing I would, and I'm asking you, is when you refer to stakeholders, do you see in there or a need to add community groups or progress associations or stakeholders within rural areas, like residents?
No, I didn't consider that. I think that that the actual stakeholders of the Rural Fire Service and Queensland Fire Rescue and Council, it is a council's levy. Yes, it is taken by the community, but no, I didn't believe there was any need. I believe that we can put together recommendations to change or not to change the current status with the rural fire levy. And if it was to change, my intention would be that it wouldn't be a lesser quantum than it is now. I just want to make that point very clear. And Mr. Mayor, can I just add one other point to this? Am I, you know, what? Yeah, happy. Just, well, not another point, just another point of discussion, which I didn't mention, which was remiss of me. As the chair of the LDNG, the Rural Fire Service has 25 brigades in this Fraser Coast area. They are quite a force to be used in times of disaster. Their degree of equipment level and their training and the quantum of the personnel. And can I just say to the community, just because you might be in an urban fire zone, urban fire trucks cannot go off-road, very difficult for them to go off-road, and they don't have that bushfire fighting capability. But also, particularly, even in an urban zone, these units will be used in times of disasters. So you will see the yellow trucks on the Esplanade. You could be seeing the yellow trucks at Point Vernon. So even though that we're taking a fire levy from certain members of the community that are in a fire rule zone, this capacity, this asset that we've got, the community has, I should say, can be used through the whole region.
Mr. Mayor, just to draw Councillor Light's attention to the wording that's proposed up there, that the CEO be directed to call for nominations. Are you comfortable with that?
Thank you.
Cheers.
So I just wanted to confirm with point 3, sorry. So that this will be closing the doors at 4:30 as well to match for customer service centres. It is, okay.
And it's in relation to the decision to fund this light pole when it fell over in 2016. Was it determined that it was the responsibility of council to replace it, and subsequently, because of that, an application was made to the insurer to fund that? So effectively, I'm asking, if the insurer did not fund it, would it still be the obligation of council to fund that light pole?
Keith, just 1 second. I'll just go to the CEO really quick.
Just for the information of council, my grandson plays for this particular club. I don't have a conflict of interest in accordance with the Local Government Act, but I just want to make councils aware that I've had no involvement with this recommendation. I've kept myself at arm's length. So if I could defer that question to the Director of Organisational Services.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Councillor Taylor, and through you, Mr. Mayor. That was a relevant factor in determining this recommendation, that at the time of the replacement, it was council's asset, and council claimed upon its insurance policy for the replacement of that asset. The club at the time paid for the difference between the money paid by council's insurance fund and the cost of replacing the pole. I understand that at that time as well, that council sought further evidence from the club about the payment of this additional cost, and that was not provided at that time, but they have since provided that detailed information to us to satisfy us that the club have paid the cost to replace what was a council asset at that time, and that's the fundamental premise behind the reimbursement.
So I can just clarify, originally, there was an insurance claim and it was determined that the club would have to meet the shortfall in the replacement. Did that then make it their asset, or is it still our asset?
No, it was still council's asset, but the decisions of the council at the time were only to provide the club with the funding paid for via the insurance claim.
So, and I want to ask this question without, there are other clubs at similar times, and I can outline who they were. There was the Harvey Bay Football Club, and my understanding was also netball, Harvey Bay Netball, from my memory, that had similar issues with light poles. Is it the case that on assessment, if council deemed it to be a council asset, the same process effectively should have applied?
If we were to receive requests for consideration of this, I would consider the same, or the facts of each and every request in the same manner, and if the facts were similar in respect to the ownership of the assets and the replacement of them, I would expect that my recommendations to council would be similar to the one before us today. So
Across the Fraser Coast?
Across the Fraser Coast. I guess this application was considered on its merits. There was some history to this, and there was additional information provided upon our approach to the club.
I guess this raises something. There's a niggle in my brain that sort of I struggle with understanding, being involved in sports for a long time, and seeing and going around to sports clubs. There are a lot of clubs that have leases with council, and a lot of sport clubs have lights and facilities. Whose responsibility are those lights, and do we have a policy that will guide us moving forward?
Whilst we adopt a structured and templated framework for the leases of each of our facilities, that is the starting point. And there are some historic leases that have been around for longer than that, which will have a slightly different framework. The general approach to the leases is that we provide a peppercorn lease for the site, and that the assets that the club puts on the site would generally be funded and owned by the clubs. That is not the case in all circumstances. For example, if I refer to the sports and recreation precinct, council has paid for and owns the lighting infrastructure and the buildings on that site, and we are leasing those to the clubs as part of the operational arrangements there. Most of the other clubs, the clubs would most likely have funded the construction of the clubhouses and lighting facilities and grandstands and the like. So it's difficult to answer your question in a general way.
The anomaly is that at that Tavistock Street, council, the previous council back in, I think it was Ted Sorensen's day, actually funded the installation. Actually, the installation of those light poles were old council assets that they reused, and that's potentially why these ones were replaced.
I'm not familiar with that aspect of the story. The evidence that was presented to me with this, it was council's assets. I understand there was a point in time that coincided on and around this time where the lease with the club was restricted to the use of the clubhouse because there were some performance issues with respect to their obligations prior to that. So there was certainly a point in time there where council was effectively the owner of that facility and its assets, and my understanding is that it coincided with this storm event. Subsequent to that, the lease of the facility and the fields, etc., were returned back to the clubhouse under a updated lease agreement. So there are some nuances to the history of this, but on balance, looking at all of the facts presented to me, I was comfortable to make these recommendations to council.
Thank you.
I'm moving it subject I just want to ask a question which may result in a slight amendment to what I'm moving, if I may. And the query relates to, you'll see that part of what we're dealing with there is an amended rates concession policy, which is essentially some machinery amendments. But if you look at page 720, it says the rates concession will apply as follows. And it's amended to read 1st of July 2019 to 30 June 2020, 10% up to a maximum of $500. It doesn't deal with subsequent years. Now, I appreciate that how much the concession might be would be a budget decision, but it seems to me that we don't want to have to revise this policy every year. At the moment, the policy would only permit a concession in the current year. I'm wondering whether there should be another dot point which says, you know, in future years as per budget, as per the budget resolution or something to that effect, whether that might be a better way of framing the policy rather than having it limited. Essentially, the way the policy is worded, I suspect it's a dead letter come 30 June next. Just wondered whether the officers could make a comment on that.
Through the chair, the intent is to keep this policy going for an additional 12 months. You will note within the overall investigating incentives encouraging conservation whether or not it will look at elements to determine whether or not there are other mechanisms that are best serve this outcome, and its intent is that through the development of other mechanisms they may actually displace the current concessions policy, with the other elements actually having a better outcome.
Thanks. Look, in those circumstances, given that the matter's going to come back within the next, well, by 30 June, I assume, doesn't matter. I'm happy to move it as per the recommendation.
Yep. You have a question?
Yeah, on 721, it says application will be required annually under this policy. Note applications will not be fully assessed until after the closing date for applications, and therefore any credit on rates notices will not appear until the next financial year's notice. All applicants be advised in writing. Is there a mechanism to the officers? Is there a mechanism that instead of having to apply for the policy yearly, which I see as an extra cost to council and an inconvenience, could this not be a notice on the property notice?
I think, I'll just explain maybe perhaps the policy. We want them to demonstrate that they're caring for the building. I think if it was automatic, then you'd get some places which are trying to do demolition by neglect, claiming the rebate. Whereas, like, I think the idea of asking them to put in a policy, put in an application form to the Heritage Advisory Committee or whoever, ensures that they sort of have to at least turn their mind to telling us how.
Yeah, but if someone is going to apply for it, they're going to be that way inclined. When the property ownership is transferred, well then, if that person is not going to take this up, well, wouldn't you review it then? I'm just trying to work out, the operational cost, is it, you know, is it a necessity? Can it be, can we save the organisation resources?
Anita Garton may well be able to answer that better than I can, but that's what I understand part of this general recommendation and review is all about, that it is a cumbersome process. The Heritage Advisory Committee and our officers have recognised that this is a cumbersome process, and there's some recommendations there in the discussion paper about how to deal with it. Given the Acting Director's comment that the reason this is limited to 1 year is that the whole thing's going to be put, reviewed, in effect signs off on that. That's my understanding.
Just a comment, it says there, applications, same item, assessment until after the closing date for applications, and therefore any credit on rates notices will not appear until the next financial year. My question is, why isn't that the next rates notice? Because we issue them 3 times a year. If it's assessed, then why doesn't that assessment show up on the next rates notice rather than into the next financial year's rates notice? This is more a timing issue though, really, because if your assessment's done just prior to the next financial year, it automatically covers off like that, but that's not what you note it when you read that. You're wondering why, if the assessment's done in December, why you're waiting to July, to the next lot, after the financial year. But if the assessment's done just prior to the end of the financial year, that makes sense then.
Thanks. Look, I just wanted to compliment the officers on this investigation and the discussion paper. There's a lot of meat in it and a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to improve our way of assisting the community. And has been noted on many occasions, heritage-listed properties are wonderful, but they do contain some restraints for the owners of those properties. This is a way we hope, or at least this paper sets out some ways in which we may be able to assist those owners and to encourage their conservation and so on. And of course, it's not just for the benefit of the owners. I mean, the better we can assist people to preserve heritage-listed buildings and so on, the more attractive the whole region is for both its residents and of course its visitors. So it makes a really significant impact in my view. I won't go through them, but I'm particularly interested in a couple of items. One is on page 696, you'll see it talks about service-related possibilities such as free heritage advice, concierge treatment, a local buy scheme and so on, and this will be tied in with the proposals in relation to the concessions. And the other one, which is actually on page 695, canvasses the possibility of a grant scheme whereby that is the council may provide, as Toowoomba does, a subsidy on a one-for-one basis up to a $10,000 grant for making some really significant improvements to property, the sorts of improvements which will be obvious and visible to everybody else in the street. There's a lot of meat in this. Dare I say, I think it mentions a heritage levy. Lots of things we can discuss over the next 9 months or so, and I look forward to seeing some of those proposals taken up, and I thank the officers concerned.
Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously.
Councillors, a procedural motion that we break for lunch.
Is there a
Second for that.
Yeah, okay. Perhaps we break for about 20 minutes?
15.
15?
Yeah.
Between 15 and 20?
15.
All right,
Budget cuts.
20 minutes. We'll break for 20 minutes. All in favour? Any opposed? Page 725.
Did we do a procedural motion?
Yes, we did. You missed it. So this is moved by Councillor Maddern, seconded by Councillor Chapman. Do you wish to speak to it?
No.
Yeah.
I think it's self-explanatory.
Yeah. No.
Which one?
The berm is page 725, the berm community RV site. So this is expanding from 20 hours to 48 hours.
So I have a question.
Yep.
In relation, on page 726, part 9, consultation, is it the fact that the only consultation has been with the president of the Burrum Community Centre? Well, that's what the request has been raised. So when it talks about consultation, the only reference is to the Burrum Community Centre.
Councillor Taylor, if I could just add, we had a small communities advisory group meeting yesterday, at which a couple of representatives from the Howard was there. It was the community centre and I can't remember the name of the two of them. It was clear that they had both known about it and been consulted around it, as from what I saw just at that meeting. So it wasn't just. So as far as I'm aware, it wasn't just the president of the Burrum Community Centre.
Any further questions or speakers?
Well, just on that point, I have to take the report for what it says, and that's that the president of the Burrum Heads Community Centre has been consulted, but the consultation doesn't reflect whether that was taken in a good light or a bad light, or whether they supported or there's no.
Yeah. The CEO?
Thanks for your question, Councillor. The Burrum District Community Centre actually heavily supports this, and they've been one that's been pushing this for quite some time. I believe she has consulted with members within the community, but I couldn't tell you which members of the community, and I just support what Councillor Madden said, that it was raised at the Small Communities Advisory Group meeting yesterday. The Men's Shed, the Burrum or Howard Men's Shed were there, and they strongly supported it at that meeting, as did the other small regional communities. But unless Jamie's got anything further to add, I couldn't provide any more clarity around that.
No. Okay. Any further questions or speakers?
Yeah. If you ask for speakers, I won't be voting in favour of this motion. As with the similar motions that have come before, I don't support the philosophy of free RV sites. For that basis, I won't be supporting it.
Yep. Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 3. That's carried 7-3. The next item is item 10.3.3, nature-based tourism, self-contained recreational vehicle ground, road access standards as accepted to requirements, page 727. So the recommendation is on page 727. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Chapman, is there a seconder? Yes. Councillor Madden? Any speakers? No. Councillor Taylor?
So can I just get someone to explain or am I right to say that the effect of the officer's recommendation is not to increase the service standard of that road? It won't be sealed.
So, as I understand it, the resolution is that the council may consider proposals to upgrade the road but it would be at the development's full cost, and it'd be provided that and it would result in increased service level, but provided that didn't result in an unacceptable maintenance burden on the council. So it gives us that flexibility to upgrade the road, provided the developer meets the cost, and provided that it doesn't present an unacceptable maintenance burden on the council.
Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.3.4, tree planting and other environmental and planning matters on page 732. Councillor Truscott's moving. Is there a seconder? Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to speak to this? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move this. And as discussed, just that purely this motion is only noting the current situation as an update, acknowledging that the Director isn't here at the moment. But personally, because the information provided here hasn't specifically addressed the items that were raised in the previous motion, particularly about identifying ways that we can go about these 100,000 trees and for street trees in general. I appreciate the work that has been done and the fact that we do have the website now to acknowledge this, and that the community can access and see how many trees we're planting, which I think is in the vicinity of about 3,000 at the moment. But yeah, this motion will, or resolution rather, will stay open until we have addressed that. So this is purely noting the action so far.
Any further speaking? Councillor Lewis?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm speaking in favour in the sense that I'm going to vote for the resolution, but I just want to endorse what Councillor Truscott's had to say. And for everybody's information, I had discussions with the Director a few months ago, and we discussed the fact that there are quite a number of resolutions dealing with these sorts of issues, including resolutions relating to koala habitats and resolutions relating to development of planning documentation to deal with the need for additional open space as, in particular, the Harvey Bay city area develops over the next 20 or 30 years, and to make sure that we plan ahead for that, and so on. Now, as a result of those discussions with the Director and other officers, the Director indicated that he'd be working to prepare a roadmap as to how we might integrate all of these various programs and all of these various resolutions. I guess this is providing some information on some of those items, but as I understand it, there's still a fair bit of work to go, and I look forward to further updates as we can progress those issues.
Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.3.5, parking in Maryborough, response to council's resolutions. That's page 737. Councillor Truscott? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just noting that I have declared it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, do I need to wait for a second?
So what are you moving something?
I'll move an amendment to the recommendation, which I've emailed around to.
So is there a seconder to that motion, which is amended from the recommendation?
Would you like me to read it?
Oh,
or?
can we just... is there a seconder? Councillor Sanderson seconding it? Yep. Okay, so you can speak to it.
Oh, do you want me to read it, or?
Yeah, that would be helpful before you
Okay.
speak to it. Yep.
Excuse me. So this is to that Council 1 decommission the metered parking console at the Bazaar Street car park effective tomorrow, the 29th of August 2019. 2, amend the metered parking fee in the 2019-20 fees and charges from the current 50 cents per hour and an all-day rate of $4 to a fee of $0. 3, not proceed with the introduction of a parking permit system in the Maryborough CBD at this time. And 4, undertake a timed parking review of the entire Maryborough CBD, including off-street parking, to provide an improved mix of timed and untimed parking zones for Maryborough CBD businesses and the community, to be brought back to a future council meeting for consideration.
Can I suggest an amendment that specifically rules out paid parking? It doesn't refer to paid parking, but,
Sure.
but if it, I just think it would be good that review looks at regulation but not paid parking.
Correct, yeah. So
Yeah.
just the time, but not paid.
So free regulated.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's fine.
Um,
So I just, yeah, it's free time, undertake a free parking.
So can it, would that be regulated parking?
Undertake a
Yeah,
timed,
undertake it,
timed regulated or?
Free regulated parking.
yeah, regular. And I just wanted to say in the parking review, and I think you do too, that it's not to consider paid parking. Like, we're not getting rid of paid parking for the first time in Maryborough in generations.
put it back in,
And as
yeah.
well, at the same time, doing a
Yes.
review that'll possibly consider.
No,
it.
no, no.
So that's what I'm
So-
saying. I just think, as this is what I'm suggesting, that you incorporate that this review does not consider reintroducing paid parking. Maybe that's supposed to be a
Yes.
final sentence.
So maybe it's undertake a parking review as it was, get rid of the free
So-
regulated.
So, yeah, back to
and
timed, yeah. Or-
to provide free parking, free regulated parking, and an improved mix.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
right. And then, so George, you were just saying.
I just
about-
think we should say that
add
the
a
review
sentence.
is not looking at reintroducing paid parking.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
So
that's-
just as a
that's-
sentence at the
it says
end of
there,
it.
provide free regulated parking. To
But
continue
did
to
you-
provide free regulated parking.
Did you want it to include a sentence that specific?
Yeah, otherwise it just looks like, yeah. I just think it should,
So it says to continue to provide free regulated parking and an improved mix of.
yeah, but we're reviewing it. When you're reviewing it, like,
Even,
take a parking review of our free regulated parking.
even like a 0.5 or
I just think that you should, a final
this
sentence,
does not-
you should just say, this review is not to consider the reintroduction. It'll be in the same thing, still in 4, yeah, but that's right. This review is not to consider the reintroduction of paid parking
Yep.
into Maryborough.
But in a future council,
Yeah,
well, we can only
that's
do for
resolution.
now, yeah.
Any resolution could bring back paid parking, but this review is not
Yeah.
to be about bringing back.
That's correct, yeah.
Well, we can't bind future councils,
Yeah.
but I don't think we should be talking, I don't think it's the mover's intention
No.
that we're conducting a review that will consider it. We don't, no council can bind a future council
Yeah.
unless they put them into some sort of agreement, a joint venture, yeah.
I had to mention the law.
Okay.
I'm happy with that, yeah.
Yep.
Is the seconder happy with that?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
do you wish to speak to your motion?
Sure, just briefly, I think, yeah, I know that Councillor Sanderson and I have had a lot of discussions with a number of businesses, particularly throughout the Maryborough CBD. We acknowledge it is difficult to get a really good outcome that everyone's going to be happy with, and there's always going to be some people that won't be happy. But we want to just try and make sure that we are doing the best that we possibly can to accommodate as many residents, tourists and business owners alike to provide the best parking options throughout the CBD that we can. I think that sums it up.
I'll speak to this. I think this paid parking spot in the middle of Maryborough really stood out to me for a little while as something that doesn't have behind it a rationale or a consistency. I think it's appropriate and relevant for the airport to have paid parking, given the significant costs to run an airport, that the users of it should contribute in a very small way towards it through the parking fees. But this spot here in the centre of Maryborough is the only other paid parking spot on the Fraser Coast. Given a few years ago we got rid of the other paid parking in Harvey Bay without addressing this one. So I think it's very appropriate that we get rid of this one. It's not a massive impact on our annual budget. And I think it's about fairness. From my experience with this spot, speaking to users of it, is it's primarily workers who pay, I think it's $4 to be there all day. $4 that goes to us. And they would be able to stay there all day, even if, because they're getting in there by about 8 o'clock. So they'll be the first people on site anyway and would be able to stay there all day. So I think its usage and its patronage will continue largely unchanged once we take away the meter tomorrow. And I'm really pleased to see the council acting so quickly, if we pass this resolution, to take the parking meter out immediately. But you know, I think it's a good step towards consistency. You either have you know, paid parking on a rational basis or not at all, and I'm much more pleased to see it getting rid of it. Yeah, Councillor Everard.
I'll speak against it, sorry. I'm just a bit concerned that, you know, we're going to have a conversation where we're going to have the business community come back to us saying, yeah, look, sorry, council, but there's no car parks for our customers because their staff are taken. What's going to happen there? Like, we seem to have all these, we've had these roundabout conversations about parking in Maryborough. The storekeepers say there's not enough park. If the staff are going to park there, well, I just think Pandora's box will be opened.
Yeah, Councillor Martin.
I guess I'll probably speak for it because I don't think customer car parking was available there anyway, because I think people were parking there all day, and so you didn't get customers coming in and out. It seemed like an anomaly to me as well, and I think I'm pleased with the idea of a review. I know we've done it before. I know we're never ever going to make everybody happy all the time, but it is worth, I think, reviewing these things in time, because circumstances change in time. And it's sometimes worth going back and having a look at what we've done just to make sure that we've got it right. Just a question to the staff, to the CEO or somebody through the chair. Is there something on our open resolution about parking? Because there was some comment about changing the parking in front of the RSL in Adelaide Street. Is that going to be part of this review?
Through the Mayor, thanks for your question, Council. There's two items I believe they're outstanding on the open resolution register. One from the 22nd of May from Councillor Sanderson Truscott about a paid parking permit system, and the other one from the Mayor and Councillor Truscott in relation to free regulated parking throughout. So it addresses those two issues, but there are no outstanding issues in the open resolution register from memory that I'm aware of that relates to parking at the RSL.
In Adelaide Street, in front of the RSL.
In Adelaide Street.
Yeah, my understanding was there was to be some relocation or rearrangement of the way, or one-way streeting or something. So that's not. Yeah, that's my question. That part of the is not being finalised. Is still that on the book?
Yeah, through the chair. I think there was a resolution in the open resolution register where it says consider traffic flow on Adelaide Street, but that was to be looked at in conjunction with the placemaking strategy, which is still being looked at, I understand, from Jamie's area. So once the outcome of that placemaking comes through, then we will look at rearranging or considering more parking within Adelaide Street. But we are currently designing Adelaide Street as part of the works for Queensland. We are not changing the traffic flow in that section. We're doing like for like. So once the placemaking strategy comes through, then we will consider what arrangements. But there's nothing there that in the current design to change the traffic flow at this point in time.
Or the parking as it currently stands?
That's right.
Okay,
yeah.
yep.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm just a little concerned as I listen to Councillor Everard and consider that latest amendment about not considering the introduction of paid parking. My understanding arising out of a round table some time ago was that we were going to have a look at the possibility of providing some kind of annual permit for those workers who may need to park all day and are otherwise trapped by 2 and 4 hour limits and so on. And certainly when we discussed that, the possibility of introducing such a system did contemplate that one might have to pay for it. So you might pay $100 a year or something to obtain a permit which would allow you to park all day in a permit-only spot or in a 4 hour spot or whatever. My concern really is that considering whether we ought to charge a fee for an annual permit, I would have thought is part of that overall consideration of a strategy. So we're seeing it in Clause 3, but in Clause 5, we're in effect saying that part of that strategy can't be that they pay an annual fee.
You're ruling it out in Clause 3.
You're ruling...
We're saying we're not doing that.
Well, we're saying we're not doing it at this time, but that's what I understood that the parking review was about. that the parking review would contemplate that we would consider that option as part of that review. That's what I understood it to mean. Well, in that event, I'll vote against it because I think we ought to consider that option.
I think we're making a decision on that option in this resolution.
Well, you know, that's not. I didn't understand it to be that. I understood that the review was to consider that as part of the timed and untimed parking complex. And as I say, my point really was that as part of that review, one would like to leave open the possibility, not of you know, metered parking or whatever, but of, you know, imposing a fee to cover the cost and so on of providing an annual permit.
Yeah, well, you'll need to vote against the resolution because Clause 3 makes a decision on it. Clause 4 says the review is about free regulated parking. And Clause 5, like I said, like it's that's part of what we're making a decision on today, not doing that permit system.
For all of those reasons, I'll vote against it.
Councillor Chapman?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I will be voting for this. You go to other cities, Gympie, Bundaberg, over the place, there's no paid parking, and I just feel that we've got to help Maryborough, the CBD, as much as we can, and I feel that but removing this is another way of moving forward and helping the workers and the shop owners in the CBD grow.
Councillor Sanderson?
Am I able to speak in favour, or do we have to go in order if someone's against?
Yeah.
Okay. I know it's a very, what's the word? I totally concur with some of my colleagues, and David, Councillor Lewis, I think your point's very valid as well in relation to the parking permit. I know it was one that I raised on behalf of the community, and I mean, seeing the resolution here, I think, as said, if we can, a review is just that. Like, if we can, our last review was fantastic. We had a great outcome for our community in relation to parking, but there's always room for improvement, I think. And a review could, I know it won't include that parking permit system, but if we could get the areas right where there's frustrations from the business owners, that might reduce or not accommodate the need for the parking permits. So I'm taking a risk here in a way where if we can get this review right and really hammer down on those businesses that have been vocal, because there's still numerous businesses, and know exactly their issues, and if we can keep that as part of the review, I think we might strike a fantastic outcome. So I do speak in favour of it, but I take on board your comments, and I take them very seriously.
Any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion up on the board, moved by Councillor Truscott, seconded by Councillor Sanderson. All in favour? 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 3. That's carried 7-3. The next item is item 10.3.6, glyphosate use, trial of alternative products and safety measures in place, on page 742. There's a recommendation on page 742 to 743. Councillor Everard's moving that, seconded by Councillor Taylor. Do you wish to speak to this?
All good.
I mean, I'm comfortable with that. I guess the only thing that I would possibly be seeking in a report on the trials is that maybe some research be done into the literature around the environmental well-being of the plots of land. So just to know whether there has been some research which would indicate that certain chemicals have a more impact or a lesser impact on the well-being and biodiversity of the soil. And that doesn't need to be part of the recommendation, but I would hope that council staff could understand it. Yeah.
I'll speak against.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, just before you do, I just noticed that our minute secretary just missed the mover and seconder for that motion. Can you just capture
Everard
that
and
again,
Taylor.
please? Everard and Taylor?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak against it, and I'll foreshadow a motion. I'll foreshadow that I move that as a risk-based decision, the council discontinue the use of glyphosate products to negate any known and unknown health and safety impacts to council staff and the community. This is ultimately a decision about how we manage risk, known and unknown risks. Obviously, it's not an illegal product. If it was an illegal product, there wouldn't be any decision for us to make. This is an area where we have to make a decision based on what type of risk we're willing to take. Jurisdictions right around the country and the world make decisions about this product. Countries like Vietnam have completely banned it. At a local level, there's councils around the world like Fairfield in the centre of Sydney that no longer use it, that have made the risk-based decision to no longer use it. There's states like Victoria that are actively reviewing it. And then there's other jurisdictions right around the world, particularly in Europe, where it's only allowed for sale to commercial enterprises where homes can't use it. So if the only real decision we can make, we couldn't ban it in the Fraser Coast Regional Council, obviously. That's well outside our jurisdiction and powers. Our decision would be about whether we continue to use it to expose our workers, our community to this product, which the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is a World Health Organization, has classified as probably carcinogenic to humans. So it's a matter about whether we take a risk-based approach and discontinue a product which was the subject of a trial in California recently where $2 billion was awarded against Monsanto and the other companies involved, or whoever the producer was. That was a record award in a jury trial. So again, it's a decision for us on risk. It is a legal product, just like tobacco is, just like alcohol is, but it's a matter of how we deal with it within our own organization and whether we continue to require our staff to use it and continue to put it in our parks. And that's why I'm voting against the recommendation and foreshadowing the motion. Are there any further speakers? Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Yeah. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's 9. All opposed? That's 1. Okay, that's carried. 9 to 1. Yep. Okay, the next item is item 10.3.7, home-based business. That's page 760.
Same recommendations. 760.
Mr Mayor.
Yep. Are you moving this?
Yes,
Yep.
I am.
Is there a
If I
seconder?
can get it straight.
Councillor Chapman? Yep. Councillor Madden?
Mr Mayor, if I can speak to this, this is a report that I specifically requested as part of a motion under the last council meeting. And I do note the conditions of it. I think there's probably a couple of things I need to say. First of all, I'm very, very keen on economic development, and I think home businesses are an awesome way of operation, particularly for startups, but just for very small businesses as well. And I'm not in favour of increasing fees or putting fees and charges on. I'm very much, keep it as simple and clean as we can. I do note the conditions here, and I note that if those conditions are complied with, there should never be a problem. I acknowledge that. My concern has arisen as a consequence of someone not complying with those conditions and then the onus being on the next door neighbour to complain in order to get some compliance around that not complying with the conditions. And it concerns me because I think that puts pressure on the neighbour to dob on a neighbour. Australians aren't dobbers, they don't like doing it, and it often creates a neighbourhood dispute which goes on and on and on. Having talked around this at the briefing, I don't think we've come up with a viable solution or a viable option for remedying that. I'm happy to keep it in mind, and if someone has got a solution that's not going to impact on home businesses, not going to increase the fee, but does ensure that people comply, I'd love to hear it. In the meantime, I'm happy to adopt the report and to thank the staff for the work that they've put into it.
Are there any further speakers? Put the motion, all in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.3.8, the schedule of fees and charge update on page 764.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have a question.
Yep.
The executive summary in the report refers to two fees, and it refers to, it says, officers regulated food stores identified that a one-off licence fee to attend an event had increased from $147 to $355, while for commercial use of roads approvals had decreased from $862 to $93.10. It refers to them as anomalies, but nowhere in the report does it refer to what they are settled at, and I'm just wondering if you could point me to the actual, what page in the fees and charges it actually refers to those two fees, so I can get some clarity. Does that make sense?
What was the first fee, councillor?
Sorry?
What was the first one?
One-off licensing fee. So it's the two fees identified in point 764. They refer to the anomalies. They don't refer in the report how they corrected those anomalies. So when I go through and trying to find them in a sea of fees, I can't easily identify them. I don't even know. I've looked 3 times and
Jamie?
And can I just point out, if you are going to amend that fee, it'd probably be easier to place it in the substantive report.
I agree. Sorry, councillor, I agree, and I do apologise. We should have made it very clear what the fee was, what the anomaly was, and what the proposed new fee was. And I apologise for that, and make sure that we, in future, we clearly spell that out in our reports.
Attachment 2 is a markup version, is that not addressed?
We got black and white.
I haven't got a marked up version and I have to... Sorry, I've got a marked up coloured version and I have to say that I could not put my finger on the changes where they sat.
Short-term food stores.
So that shows that it's from 355 to 147.50. So that when I look at the report, just so I'm clear, when it says it was increased from 147 to 355, so it's now been amended back to 147.50. Yep.
That's right, councillor, and that first got brought to my attention with the Seafood Festival, who made me aware that they were having difficulty getting short-term licences, or the short food stalls at the festival, because of the significantly increased fee, and it appears that was an oversight during the budget process, and it's recommended that reduce the fee back to basically what it was in the previous year of $147.50. So the other fee, $7.99, councillor Councillor Madden, is it?
So that's where it was identified to be.
$93. Hang on.
So that's now,
$93.10 and it goes back up to 862. Is that right? 36, which is different from the 862.
yeah.
Maybe that's not the one.
Or maybe that is not the one.
But they're very close, though, aren't they? One's So it's amended from $93.10. It's mobile food vending. So you're saying the application fee was always at $800, $862? Because I recall that being considerably reduced. Yeah, I'm surprised by that increase. I assumed that when they said that there would, that had been decreased by that much. I remember it being $800 in 2012, and then it being reduced to something like $400 in 2013, but...
Is this a matter that we can lie on the table?
Well, we can, but we're receiving applications daily.
Yeah, but we've still got a bit to go on the agenda. We're going into confidential.
I'll lie on the table while we...
Yeah, well, we get it, yeah. Is there information that we want to see the fee over the last 7 or 8 years? I imagine that's what Councillor Taylor was asking for. Well, can we just find out what information?
Yeah, but I also noticed when I get a colour copy, because I didn't get a colour copy, that there's also another change in a fee from an application fee for a local law activity. It's been changed from $386 to $920, which you think that would be covered in the report. Page 797.
There's another one here at 800, which goes from $410 back to $180, which I don't think is referred to in the report either.
So why would they not capture in the report for the substantive changes? And it's hard for me, when I've got a black and white copy, to even notice that that's been changed.
I can't answer that question, Councillor. All I can do is apologise for that and ensure that it won't happen again. I don't know if we can provide, Jamie, if you can provide any other information, but if councillors want to leave this lie on the table, we can go back and get some more information, either and come back to this item later on the agenda or at a subsequent agenda. But it does mean for where we do have fees that are significantly higher in our current fees and charges that we're proposing to lower.
And also the other way.
Yeah.
There's also some that are significantly increasing.
Yeah. Well, the fact that there's no resolution on that, it's not going to upset those people.
Well,
but
yeah,
it's the
I'm just saying
people.
that if we do, yeah.
So it's probably an issue that we do need to address relatively quickly. If the council resolve to lie on the table, I'd ask the Director of Development Community to source the author of the report and the information on prior years' fees and charges, and to be able to talk to his report.
I'm happy to move it.
So will we be able to do that today?
We can try. We can lie on the table, we can lie on the table.
Or, I mean, perhaps we could just move a resolution that those that were going to go down, so we approve it in part. I think we'd all agree to reducing the fees on those ones.
Yeah, I mean,
But we'd like more
I would
information
be-
on the ones that are going to be increased.
Yeah, the ones that increase that much, I'd be seeking to be amended anyway, so perhaps they could be dealt with at different times.
Okay, well, perhaps if we lie it on the table and if we can get the report author here, then we can go through that. But otherwise, I would suggest that perhaps we could move the resolution to accept it in part and await the further details. Yeah. But Councillor Everard's moving that it lay on the table. All in favour? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.3.9, development permit for Madsen Road, Irwin, page 809. Councillor Chapman's moving this. Is there a seconder? Councillor Madden?
I have a question.
Yep.
Sorry, what page was it again?
809.
Sorry, Marlene, you did that back. So can I, through the chair, get clarity? This development application and the conditions subject to this development application will also relate to an impending infrastructure agreement that will be considered by this council through a resolution. Is that, can you confirm that firstly?
Through the chair, the The location's located in the Nikenbah Structure Plan area, in the Nikenbah local area. Council has the Emerging Community Local Plan Area Infrastructure Agreement Policy. This development, including those conditions requiring what constitutes trunk, would be eligible for application and implementation through an infrastructure agreement under that policy.
And while I understand that you can't put a condition rate relating to an infrastructure agreement because it takes two parties to agree to it, is there a place within the conditions you can place an advisory note referring to that infrastructure agreement?
Through the chair, certainly, councillor. Given that the trunk infrastructure may include more than one linear item, I would recommend that if you went to page 832 and 833, we include advice notes. An additional note 9 could be added.
That would simply say
that would you like me to
if you
possibly have attempt to? It would say that council may enter into an infrastructure agreement for trunk infrastructure in accordance with council's Emerging Community Local Plan Area Infrastructure Agreement Policy relating to...
Maybe just let Marley catch up.
It's Emerging Community Local Area Infrastructure Agreement Policy.
Just for clarity, oh, so you're still going, are you?
Yes, please. For trunk infrastructure provided as a requirement of a condition of this approval.
So just to clarify, it's not the resolution 9, the advisory note 9
Be added
to the development approval by including the following words.
I wouldn't even say point 9, I would just say that the advice notes of the development application include the following.
Yep, that's
Notes of this application include to that number 9, and that would obviously be subject to the mover and seconder. I indicate from my perspective, when this was brought forward, it was my understanding it was council's desire to see the development application and the infrastructure agreement come together, and I understand that can't happen, so this is a way of identifying that there will be discussions and a resolution brought back to council in relation to this infrastructure agreement.
Through the chair, correct.
Yeah, through the chair. Looking at this map on page 812, it doesn't look like there's any green space, any more extra green space added to the proposal. Is there any scope in the development approval process for that to be a requirement?
Through the chair, If you go to page 835, identifies the coloured area is the extent of the current permit, which is in fact, the second development approval over what is the Springs development. In the bottom left-hand corner, you will see the lake area. Beside that, you will identify an area that is park. So this particular development and the lots that are being proposed are all within walking distance and connected through to a park that's been provided, and that has got a level of embellishment now, but will continue as part of this development continues. So it has a local area park that services what is the whole of the Springs area. Further to that, then there is also the opportunity of working through, which we are working through, is to look at least getting linear active, or what we linear passive recreation, which is walking paths along the edge of the drainage areas. And you'll note the drainage area goes all the way up from what is they call it the Alps area at the top, down all the way through, and there's a number of drainage corridors through the structure plane area. So it is serviced by a local area park. It is provided by the same development in extent, and then with this being the second stage of that development.
Councillor Chapman?
Yes, Mr Mayor and councillors. It says there that I'm looking at the northern corner of I'm on page 835. And it says proposed left in, left out access, final decision, position and sizing to be confirmed. I'd really like a way of locking in that there's definitely no right access out of that corner. I know it's right at the bottom of a hill, it's on a dangerous hill, and I just asked the officer about that. It was what confirmation that a design will come back and council will have no decision over it. A design will come back and that's been changed from not being a left in, left out.
Through the chair. It's specifically conditioned that we would allow a left in and left out only. The operational works, even for the design, will require a detail and including what mechanisms need to be put in place to protect that. There has been comprehensive consultation between our engineers and the applicants to ensure that, one, we're comfortable with it even being there to start off with because of the location. They've got a lot of work to do internally to get this to work, given that you have that drainage going through. Don't be at all surprised that they come back wishing to remove it. However, it's part of their current proposal. We've got it conditioned and we've got concerns, and they would have to, as part of the subsequent approvals, demonstrate, including those physical measures they would incorporate into there, like central medians or likes, to ensure that it was left in and left out only at that location.
Question to the officer there. I look at the left out. To me, left in, I can see there's someone's coming from town and wants to go into the development. I can see that being a bonus. I'm concerned about the left out because what you'll find is we've got problems on Burham Heads Road at the moment where we've got left ins and lefts out. That's what I'm looking at. People are actually driving up the road, doing a U-turn, and then going back to the direction that they were originally wanted to go. If we say that that we're not going to give left out on this development, to get out of the development, they can still go to where they are. They still virtually drive up the road towards where they do a U-turn out onto the road, but they would access the Madsen Road a lot safer than if they had to go up there and do a U-turn in front of the flowing traffic. And with the, I'm just asking, is is there a way that we can actually just ask for a left in there and see if the council here are willing to accept that?
This is the new one.
Yeah, if you look at the map, you actually drive on their own lane to the intersection of where the subdivision is now, and you come out. We've got the problem on Burham Heads Road where people cannot turn into a. They're actually going up the road, doing a U-turn, and then coming back to the entrance where they're to enter. What you'll find here is people on the northern side of that estate will come out of there, will turn left and head south, will go down to the intersection and do a U-turn there and then go back again. Now, they can do exactly the same route on the inside of the property where the inside road is and access that Madsen Road a lot safer, because that area is going to get a lot busier with traffic with what's going on there with the sports precinct and the whole area. And I've just got concerns that we're going to have something that's put up in front of council about people doing U-turns or the police saying it's unsafe to do U-turns, and then we put signs up to stop U-turns. Why don't we look at it straight away now?
Can I clarify that the actual application and under the conditions, it'll be subject to a traffic impact assessment for approval by council? And it says the configuration of potential upgrading for any existing Madsen Road, Springway intersection to cater for additional traffic from development and satisfy the requirements as listed below, and it goes to the road. Isn't that condition better suited than just a discussion around the table? Wouldn't it be better to get a proper endorsed impact assessment as the conditions outline, which will address those concerns? But we don't need to add any more, it's already there.
Through the Chair, Councillor, you're correct. With this development and that traffic, they've also got to look at the Madsen Road intersection as well and any upgrades that are necessary for that with the traffic. Also recognising that ultimately that intersection, when development occurs on the other side of the road and becomes four legs, it'll have to go to traffic lights. It will more than likely then have actual provision for a U-turn facility as part of the traffic lights as the area evolves. But the councillor is correct in that as part of their full detailed design when they come in, it needs to be supported by a traffic impact assessment to ensure that it meets all the relevant current standards and requirements.
And that specifically relates to what Councillor Chapman was talking about, Madsen Road, but also the Springway, that it has to comply with council's planning scheme policies and approved traffic infrastructure, traffic impact assessment, and it must be based on predicted traffic volumes and turning movements for 10 years, hence from the time of completion of the whole development. So that really articulates all your concerns in there, I would have thought.
Through the Chair, it doesn't. We've had these traffic reports and different things, such as like what's happened on Burham Heads Road now. And there's been studies, been traffic reports and things done with that. I'm happy to just let this go through, but I just feel that if the council, in their wisdom, give this left out, I feel that we're going to have a problem on our hands, and that's why I was just trying to address it here. But I'm quite happy to wait for the report to come back, and then. But I just hope that as a council we get the decision to have a look at that report. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers? So I think we've got a mover. Is it moved, Councillor Chapman, seconded Councillor Mattern, with amendment? I'll put the. Can I just clarify with the? Does the amended recommendation cause any concerns for the officers? No. Absolutely not. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mayor, I'd actually like to speak on this motion too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
No.
Questions.
It was
he
a question.
He hasn't actually spoken to the motion yet.
I asked a couple of questions, Mr. CEO, about it. So I'd just like to speak on this motion about this. This is a great development that we're seeing going ahead in this area. The quality and standard of the construction of this development, it's they're larger blocks. It's been proven that larger blocks in this region do work. People want to have caravans and boats and different things, and I've always said that these large blocks are a lot easier to house, and people in these. I was talking to a gentleman yesterday that's just moved into the Springs Estate, and he says it's a really great environment and it's just starting to grow. So it is a great development, and this is turning a one block into 199, and we're going to see a lot more in this area for growth. Thank you.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.3.10, the 2018-19 Regional Arts Development Fund Advisory Committee recommendations.
Mr Mayor, this is the matter where I have conflict, and I'll absent myself until it's finished.
Yep. The recommendation is over pages 836 to 837. Councillor Everard's moving it. Is there Councillor Madden seconding? Are there any speakers? No. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. David will see. I think that was the noise of the toilet door. Yeah. Okay. Item 10.3.11 is the flood hazard mapping amendments, page 841.
Mayor, I believe we laid this on the table at the last meeting, so it has to come off.
Yeah, so Councillor Madden is moving that it be taken.
That it be brought back, taken off the table, or whatever it is.
Taken from the table. I put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. There's a recommendation on page 842.
Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move that recommendation.
And you're seconding? Yep. Are there any speakers?
And the maps have been tabled.
Oh yeah, tabling the maps. They're all there. So Darren, seconding. All right. Any speakers or questions? Okay, I'll put the motion then. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously amongst people who are still in the room.
Yep.
Do you reckon David had any questions on that one?
No, too late.
I was expecting to deal with that quite quickly.
They went to the bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Item 10.4.1, Aldershot drainage matter and vehicle crossover, page 851.
852 is the recommendation.
Yeah. The recommendations, page 852. Is there a move? Councillor Chapman?
No, he's going to the bathroom.
I think he's gone to the toilet. Is there a seconder? Yeah. Councillor Madden. So who? Any speakers? Not. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. That's him. The next item is item 10.4.2, Ergon Energy Service relocation. You didn't have anything to contribute on the... I'll just check that you don't... We went through a few more matters than just the RADF. You didn't have anything to contribute on the flood hazard mapping or the Aldershot? No? We're up to 10.4.2, yeah. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Everard is moving the Ergon matter, the recommendation on page 857. Seconded Councillor Chapman. Do you wish to speak to this?
I do. I would like to thank the officers for their consideration of this matter and progressing it. This will make take a lot of pressure off that troublesome intersection.
Yeah.
Could I just ask a question?
Yes.
Just of the officers, I'm just wondering, does this sort of redesign envisage the possibility that Boundary Road may be four-laned eventually? Will it cater for that?
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor, through the chair, we are planning for a ultimate four-laning of Boundary Road in the future. So this intersection, the footprint that we are designing, we can turn into a four-laning intersection in the future. So we are actually making the service relocation to make provision for the future four-laning of that road. Thanks.
Future-proofing the intersection.
Yeah, it's good for the school communities. Are there any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. The next item is item 10.5.1, water charge relief policy on page 860. And the recommendation is on page 860. Is there a mover for that? Councillor Truscott, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Are there any speakers to it? Yeah. Put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Item 11.1, pedestrian safety improvements on Muir Street, page 874. This is a motion that's of Councillor Everard's. Is there a seconder for this? Councillor O'Keefe? Yeah, it's a motion of due notice. Can you speak to it?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just look, have had a number of calls, contacts from business community and residents and road users about the safety of that bottom end of Muir Street. We have a lot of heavy vehicles that are using that to get to the harbour, to the Urangan Boat Harbour. There are on occasions we have cars parked from the units across the road on the road verge, and there's nowhere for pedestrians to go on that area. Also, the crossing at the creek crossing at the bottom, very narrow, and again, if there's a pedestrian on there and there's a heavy vehicle, we just want to take the risk out of it for the local users of that area of the road.
Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Before we move on, we've got currently off the table items 10.2.2, 10.2.3, 10.3.8. Perhaps you're moving that item 10.2.2 come off the table?
176.
Yeah. So this is going back to the CCTV stuff. So all in favour that we take 10.2, put 10.2.2 back on the table? All in favour? That's carried. Okay, so we'll go back to page 176. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Mr. Mayor, during the break, we've collated the proposed amended resolution, and that's been provided to Marlene to put up on the board for councillors to see. Marlene? The proposed amended resolution on this item, if you could bring that up.
She's still dealing with the motion to bring it back to.
I see, Mr. Mayor, we have two proposals there, do we, that we've been sent through? One from the CEO and then another one from Director Parsons, which I thought was the more elegant of the two.
I think I'm the mover, aren't I? Yeah, I was more comfortable with the CEO's one. So I thought it was a little bit more. It was more general in terms. Nothing personal, Keith. I thought yours was amazing, really.
So this is the new motion moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Truscott. Is that right?
Where is
Yeah,
the new
there.
one?
Yes.
Right, yep, let's see, make sure the inclusion, yep, that'll do. That's it.
Okay. Any speakers? So this is combining Councillor Lewis's amendments into the existing recommendation?
Yep.
Okay. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Councillor Everard is moving that we put back on the table item 10.2.3. All in favour? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Item 10.2.3 is at page 211. And so Councillor Everard is moving the recommendation, which is pages 211 to 213. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Madarin? Do you wish to speak to this?
I've got a question when you get time. I have a question, yes.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I appreciate that it's structured so that these are just priorities and so on, but I'm wondering, that there seems to me to be a number of items, in particular on page 212, in table 2, list following requests for consideration in future budgets. There's a swag of, when you read the material closely, there's a swag of items there which are police requests and which are not really supported when you read the documentation. I'm a bit surprised that they're scoring as high as they are. I mean, we've got, for instance, Boat Harbour Drive and Main Street. We have the roundabout, the Esplanade and Main Street, which I guess is the Wetside area. That might be appropriate. Boat Harbour Drive and Ibis Boulevard, Queens Road and Torquay Road. Queens Road and Torquay Road, of all things, is the police station, you know. I've raised this question earlier this morning, that of the 30-odd requests we had, 22 were from the police, and I get the distinct impression that someone said, look, you know, what would you like Santa to bring you? And the police have said, how much have we got? You said, a bit over $500,000. Oh, well, we'll have all of these things. You know, I really, when you read the material, there's another one, Boat Harbour Drive and Beach Road, and you have a look at the material, and the incidence of offences is quarterly. That is, we're going to get 4 offences a year, and so it's proposed to spend $47,000 for 4 offences a year. I mean, that's what it says. When you look at the mapping, it's only the cameras are only covering the intersection. They're not covering the adjoining premises, and these are not high pedestrian traffic areas.
Can I point out that on that note, one of the most successful uses of CCTV footage, particularly if police have access to it, is finding a vehicle fleeing a scene of a crime. And that's why you always try to have connectors like those roads you've just referred to, particularly if police have access to them. Being involved in police pursuits myself, particularly in Brisbane, they are able to find cars quite quickly and cordon off areas. It's one of the most effective ways of actually catching offenders, is the use of those. That's why it's so important to have connectivity to the police stations, in my view.
Sure. Well, just continuing my question was really whether those sorts of requests ought to be shifted into the subsequent assessment areas rather than ticked off at the moment, because they are really getting to be outside. I mean, while I don't doubt what you say about the efficacy of that for police purposes, it's really getting outside what our policies and so on are designed to look at, which is public safety and so on. I mean, that's apprehension, of somebody well after the event. It's not the deterrent. The deterrent is having it at places like, the intersection of Tavistock Street and the Esplanade and those sorts of places where there's a high pedestrian frequency. And really it goes to the point I was making. This isn't a speech, this is a question. It goes to the point I was making earlier, that, the state government ought to be putting their hand in their pocket. They earn a lot more money than we do, and this is a state government responsibility. So my recommendation was going to be that we look at shifting. My question is, is there any practical reason why we can't shift some of those items out of table 2 and put them into table 4?
Answer?
Can I just clarify something?
Yeah.
So, Councillor Lewis, just with some of those requests that were on part of the community policing board that council used to have, a lot of those requests were actually lodged by members of the public for public safety issues. Yeah, but but they were logged through that process where the community groups had come to the community policing board. So the police were the conduits for the community on some of those occasions. I'm not saying all of them, but they were raised by a number of them were raised by members of the public.
Okay, yeah.
Speak for the motion?
Yep.
Speak for it. I appreciate comments that Councillor Lewis has made, but in my experience is that cameras are not all, as Councillor Taylor said, are not always placed in maybe the obvious place where offences are being committed, but where the information can be gathered. And also, if offenders can be caught, that also limits then the impact on the community as well for future crimes. Particularly, there was a case, and I think it was Esk, but I might be wrong, where they had a camera in the entry and exit of towns, and I know that Toogoom and Burrum are very interested in that, simply not because there's an offence taking place where they're going to put the camera, but are they enabled to capture the information that can apprehend the offenders and therefore stop further crime in the region and in the region. Thank you.
So can I clarify, Was that a request to amend the motion?
No, that was a question, but I was happy to make a request to amend the motion to shift items 10, 14, 16 and 20 from table 2 to table 4.
I'd be seeking the officer's advice.
Question, or are you speaking for or against?
Hang on a sec. Well, okay, Keith was about to respond, I think.
I'll make an attempt through you, Mr Mayor, to answer that question. The assessments are done in accordance with the framework, which we've just had a look at and adopted. We've only assessed the requests that are before us, and some of these requests date back about a year when we've earlier engaged with the police around their requirements to meet the CCTV, or for requirements for CCTV. If there are other requests that we have adequate information that come in before the scheduled budget amendment, we would assess those, and this list may get reprioritised if there are more needy requests brought to us in that time frame. Otherwise, and it will still be Council's decision as to whether or not any further funds are allocated to this in the budget amendment process. So there's no guarantee that that would be the case, but what we're suggesting here is that there are some requests received, they have been assessed, we've run out of money at this round, and it will be an option for Council to include further funds at the next round, but it would also be an option for Council not to fund those at the next round and await till the next financial year's budget, and then be considered in the priority of any and all requests that are received and assessed at that time.
If I could maybe provide a more direct response, there's nothing stopping the council from moving the CCTV applications that you requested from one table to another. That's entirely a matter for the council to decide.
Yeah, Councillor Chapman?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I've actually got a question on item 7, which is in table 1. It said about a CCTV to be placed on the end of Urangan Pier. Just like to ask the officer, is this would this be the most beneficial place to put a CCTV, is on the end of the pier, or should it be on the start of the pier?
There's already one.
There's already one there.
Where people walk on and off.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Well,
put one
there's-
there's one at the start. Yeah.
The end of the pier is a known hotspot for fights between fishermen and tourists. It is a hotspot of violent activity, particularly in relation to fishing. So I think it's a great location, and the police are being called regularly to that site.
I was just thinking of saving a bit of cable.
So, oh yeah, Councillor Lewis?
Oh, sorry.
Yes, Mr Mayor, thanks. I assume that there's no appetite among the mover and seconders to adopt my suggestion.
So can you tell us which ones they were again, please?
Well, 10, 14, 16 and 20, which are all in table 2 at the moment.
And 20.
I mean, I take Director Parsons' advice that...
Moving them to 4, so they're considered later.
Well, they're in...
Yeah, so it'll still be assessed and presumably get the same.
Yeah, no, I'm not happy to accept it, sorry.
All right, look, I won't persist with it, but I will speak in favour of the motion. Obviously, I don't want it to get to the stage where raising some cautionary hand in relation to CCTV becomes like speaking against motherhood, and that's the risk I know in these sorts of circumstances. And I'm exquisitely conscious of the value in council cooperating with law enforcement authorities for the betterment of the community. That isn't my problem. My concern is that, as the reports have indicated, there's a vast amount of money being expended on this particular project, which, worthy though it may be, is not the only worthy project. We have heard this morning from Lloyd Madden about the value of the rider program, which is designed to improve public safety as well as, of course, the safety of young drivers. And I would really support the idea that we might enter into some arrangement which provides them with ongoing funding. We've passed a resolution today that we're going to look at funding the flying doctor service, because that's a very worthy cause. I've raised in the past the value of our providing some support to volunteer marine rescue for very good reasons, because they provide not just a safety service but a tourism advice service as well, and so on. All of these things are great ideas. Most of them are really outside the strict, if you want to take a strict sort of narrow view of what a local government should do. But we're spending, as I say, very large amounts of money bailing out the state budget by looking at these requests. And some of them, frankly, worry me a little bit in terms of privacy. I think in the earlier report there was one there that talked about Point Vernon, and admittedly this is, you know, coming from the community, but the community that are informing the police in relation to, well, Pyalba Park. This is a very popular park with families and kids, but late at night there are people hanging out or having barbecues. Well, you know, as a kid, I went to the beach to hang out and to have barbecues. I mean, these are not antisocial activities, but we're going to have Spy in the Sky, etc. And so I think we do need to temper this with common sense and a concern for privacy, most of all a concern for the budget. I'll vote for it because I appreciate that there's some really good work gone into this and there's some really good proposals, but I do think we oughtn't to be just willy-nilly ticking off everything that anyone requires as if we were some kind of benevolent Santa Claus.
I'd like to speak to this.
Yeah, I take your point, Dave, on this one, and I note that the policy that we endorse today, what it lacks is it lacks a community safety strategy developed by our council that the officers can refer to, and I think that's probably what's lacking here. But in the absence of having a broader strategy for our councillors to be able to draw from when they assess these applications, I'm happy with the process, the application vetting process at the moment. But I think that that's missing and we could probably go a little bit further.
Any further speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Then the other item we still have to be considered is item 10.3.8. Are we in a position?
Yeah,
okay. Councillor Everard, was that we put back on the table? All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried. So this is 10.3.8, 764. Yeah, that's in the second one. I think so, yeah. Is that the doctors? Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to try and steer away from fluoride. I'll just say, talk about something else. Yeah. Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah. Okay, good.
Give me a hard copy. All right, let's go. 764.
Okay, did you have questions that you, Councillor Taylor?
Well, I haven't seen the
Councillor Taylor, did you have any questions on this one?
So, just to clarify, I've received a document or a piece of paper, and the title is, it's got the different fees, it's page 584, so it must have been a previous version of the report, referring to the amended fees. So just so I can go through them and I understand, the first fee is relating to horse, cattle and other livestock, which is changing. And that says from $115 to $43.10. Then you have a personal appearance service, application for transfer amendment of approval, and that's gone from, in 1819, was $155.50. It was adopted this year for $515 and now has been revised to $383. The ones that sort of Then you had one that was the application for short-term license, which was $147.50. It was adopted at $355, and the proposed has gone back to $147.50, which makes sense in my mind. Then the application fee for a local law activity was at $670. It was adopted at $386 and now has proposed to $920, which is one of the ones that I wanted clarity on. That seems quite significant without having any sort of rationale in the report. And then mobile food vending, it was listed at $862 in 1819, adopted at $93, and then proposed is now $836. And then there's one more, public health for swimming pools. The transfer or amendment of approval was $155, moved up to $410, now is proposed at $180. And then you obviously have the impoundment fee of $252. I guess my question is, what is the rationale for those, particularly those two fees? Particularly the local law activity and the mobile vending application of $836. So that's the first question. The second question is, can you advise what the previous fees were for the last 4 years for that mobile application for a mobile food vendor? Did that make, so there was two questions, yeah?
Sorry. Mr. Chair, if I could just comment. There was significant work done on the calculation of the fees based on cost recovery this year. Some of those calculations, there were some errors, and that's why this has been brought back to council. The particular fees that you're talking about, if we talk about the mobile food vending initially, there was an error made where it was dropped down to $93, and when we saw that, we asked finance to revisit that, and we've come up with a new fee of $836, which is slightly less than last year. What was the other one? I don't have access to the last 4 years. I was a bit caught out coming to the meeting today, so I didn't have time to get...
So when you talk about cost recovery, you're saying it cost council $836 to process an application for a mobile food vendor?
That's correct, yes. It's not really a simple application. We received the application from the vendor. It's referred to the Environment Health team to look at food hygiene requirements, and it's also referred to engineering or infrastructure services to assess traffic safety. And sometimes these applications are, I want to trade on the side of the road here. So there's a fair bit of effort and inspection in identifying and helping the applicant identify a suitable location. So there's usually a fair bit of time and effort goes into those assessments.
Okay, point taken. So that would be for both. So you're saying that finance you've sent it through to council to be reviewed based on the cost recovery. They're the fees that
That's correct.
are appropriately triggered.
If I could just stress, it is cost recovery. There's no profit element included in that.
And that was one of our concerns, that we had to make sure that we had this right. And when we identified those couple of errors, obviously we had to bring that back to have them corrected.
Is it appropriate for me to ask, this through the chair, why I have a schedule that would have made this much clearer, that appears to have been in the initial report, that's no longer in the initial report?
I'm not sure what you're looking at, councillor. Jamie, can you respond
I'm
to
just
that?
trying to understand why it's been like...
Through the chair, further to your earlier question, previous years, I can tell you that the 17-18 financial year, the fee was $845. Secondly, the report initially had the changes included within the report. It was, and there was some clarity issues around the changes in the final document. It was converted to a report that had 2 attachments, so the changes with the track change version and the original, and in taking one out, it didn't, we made the error of not ensuring we spelt it out within the report. So we converted contents of the report to 2 attachments, a clean-cut version for adoption, a track change version actually showing what the changes were and where they are in the fees and charges schedule, but omitted ensuring we had maintained that documentation in the proposal. So actually spelt it out as it was before. So the document you have now is represented by what is attachment 2 in the current report before you.
So it was done as part of the body of the report, and then it was removed out of the body of the report, and just the schedule was put in. Can I seek that this document be tabled? Because that is a very efficient way of a council being able to read information, and it probably should be the way that it's done in the future.
Is there a seconder for that be tabled? Councillor Madden, I put that the documents be tabled. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried.
Mr Mayor,
Yeah.
just a question on that. Will that then become part of the minutes for the benefit of the general public who will be reading the minutes, and it's not actually in the agenda as it is?
No, we don't think we normally do put them in.
No, it's just document referred to.
The document system is being the document table.
So may I ask just another question then? If someone's reading the minutes of this meeting and they see that there's been a document tabled, are they able to then access that document? And how would they go about that process?
They would request access to the document, we would source it from our record system.
There would be an RTI, it would be a public document.
These things are tabled.
So is there a mover for that recommendation on page 764? I don't think we did.
No.
Straight to questions.
Yeah, Councillor Light is moving this. Is there a seconder? And Councillor Madden? Any further discussion or questions? No, I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. So there's no questions on notice. There's no consideration of items placed on the agenda with consent of the mayor.
Thanks, Alan.
General business. Is there any general business?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have a question on notice to the CEO. It's come to my attention, a few constituents have indicated to me that they've got issues with highly reflective roofs of houses and sheds. And I'm also led to believe too that the benchmarking, one would consider that many councils do have some type of restriction in our town plan to prevent this occurring. Can I ask you a question on notice to benchmark, if that is the case, of highly reflective roof coverings and bring back to council to a briefing session for discussion?
Any further items?
I just have
Yeah.
matter of process. I understand that this is a significant agenda, and we have confidential matters. Now, if it's a case that no one needs to discuss any confidential matters, is it a case that you can, as a matter of process, ask if there are any matters that need to be discussed in confidential or go straight to the voting of them? Because more often than not, we ask process questions which aren't really dealt with in confidential. I'm not sure if there's anything in there that needs further clarity that requires a door to be shut to vote on these matters.
I think I will. I think we will go into confidential. It might not be in confidential for long.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Long way to go.
Oh, we're not. We're just checking if there's still any more general business. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just two things I wanted to raise. Firstly was previously we'd approved for the outdoor use of parks for funerals, and in talking with funeral director, I understand there has already been outdoor funerals take place, and as well as the funeral can be expected to go, that it was very well received. No members of the public, most people probably in this room didn't even know about it, and yeah, the family were very receptive of it, which I thought was great to hear, and they were very thankful to the council for having that allowance now. Secondly was Pier to Pub swims on this weekend, so thanks, Darren. Looking forward to it.
Bruce the Shark.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got your Speedos too.
Any further items of general business? If not, I'll move that we go into confidential for items 15.1, 15.2, 15.3, 15.4 under section 275H of the Local Government Act. I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Item 15.3. Councillor Chapman's leaving the room for this one. This resolution is different to the recommendation, and it is moved by Councillor Mattern, seconded by Councillor Everard. Is there any discussion? People are aware of the slight changes?
Yep.
I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Dennis? Thanks. Okay, item 15.4. This is moved by Councillor Mattern, seconded by myself. Are there any speakers? I'll put the motion. All in favour? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Is there any further